Again, if you have any questions at any time, just ask between. It makes it more lively, and then we can immediately answer all the questions which come up. So now the next part is the new amendment to Part 21, a little bit more in detail and what is changing for me, what changes for us, related to the applications for type certificates, supplemental type certificate, restricted type certificate, major changes or major repairs, or APU ETSO. By the way, do we have ETSO applicants in the room? Oh yes, we have. Okay, thank you. So we will go through a short introduction of the overview of the main changes in Part 21 and the corresponding AMCGM material, changes to the application and to the certification basis, to the new requirements for determining the level of involvement, which is a huge part of the new Part 21, so the new risk-based approach, how to apply this new LOI determination, proposal from applicant side, determination from EASA side. We will see some examples that we have seen during the advanced application phase to make it more visible for you. The advanced application of new LOI concepts, making a short overview what we did, and some best practices and overall EASA considerations. And again, if you have any questions, just ask them, interrupt. And if I'm too quick, interrupt me as well. So, the introduction of a documented risk-based level of involvement. So this is the main thing what it is. It's a risk-based approach. It's not completely new. In principle is, I think, what we did before as well. So I think EASA never looked into the well-known, easy compliance demonstration where we well know that the applicant makes a perfect job. So already in the past we looked into the more risky parts, but what we did now, where it's now well documented, it's more standardized, and everybody follows the same approach, that we concentrate our efforts in the most risky parts. This approach is included in the certification program, and this is included in the application. So 21A15, which requires an application from an applicant for a change to the type certificate or for a new type certificate, includes now this risk-based approach. So everybody is obliged by the new Part 21 to provide a proposal where EASA should be involved based on the risk. But we come to all this in detail. Here we have a good overview, which will not answer all questions, especially not for the ones who have not yet read the cert memo or the AMCGM material, but we will come to all this in detail through the further presentation. In green, what you see here are what has been changed inside the new Part 21 and AMCGM material. And we will go quickly through that. At the top you see what the applicant's obligation is, and at the bottom what the EASA's obligation is. So we have to file an application. That's not new, but it shall be complemented with the first version of the certification program. That's not really new as well. It was implicit in the past, but now it's well described in 21A15 that a certification program is a must. Otherwise, the application is not complete and it would be not accepted. This does not necessarily mean that you have to send it at the same point of time. That would be the best, but it's not always possible, and that's fine as well. So you can do it after the sending of the application. However, from our consideration, the application is complete with the certification program. And that's the way it's described in 21A15 as well. The certification program shall include already a proposal of the certification basis. So certification means the type certification basis, so CS, the environmental protection requirements, ICAO Annex 16, and the OSD certification basis, for sure, if applicable. So therefore, the applicant has to provide a certification program, and this shall include as well what we call compliance demonstration items, which are grouping of compliance demonstration, and the only sense of this grouping is to provide a risk assessment. We come to this in more detail afterwards, and based on this risk assessment, the applicant shall propose the level of involvement from EASA side based on the risk. When we have received this proposal, the best thing which could happen is we just accept it and the certification program stays as it is. If we don't accept it for whatever reason, we will justify why we don't, and then the cert program has to be adapted accordingly to get it accepted. What is new in Part 21 as well is the obligation from the applicant, if you have any difficulties during the certification process, if a certification test failed, something like that, then you have the obligation to inform us. And based on this new information, we may adapt our involvement, maybe not, but at least we should know it. And based on this additional information, we can adapt our involvement. All the rest is business as usual. So you have the applicant, at least an approved design organization, has to demonstrate compliance and verify the compliance by the independent checking function. And we have a kind of second verification, so we make some sample checks based on our oversight obligation. And if we are satisfied with this one and with the declaration of compliance from the applicant side, you will get the approval. So now we go into more detail of this whole process. So what this change does not, it does not impact the application forms and administrative processing currently in use. So you perform your application probably via the application portal, business as usual. Nothing is changed here. What we have provided in the application paragraphs, so 21A15, 93, 113, 432C, which is for TC, major change, STC, and for major repairs. And as Michael explained, in the top right corner you can see the paragraphs always related to Part 21. We clarified what has to be included in the certification program. In line with wide practice applied in the past, so in principle what you did in the past has not changed, but now we have documented, written down what we really expect from it, which maybe help because, for example, the technical description was not always so brilliant that we could understand the issue in the first instance. So the application shall include as a minimum a preliminary description of the product, the intended use of the product, and the kind of operations for which certification is requested. This is now the wording of 21A15. If you apply for an STC, for example, you have to explain what is the change to the type certificate that you want to implement by this STC. You don't have to explain the whole product, but this is now the wording from 21A15 when you apply for a new TC RTC. But in principle, it's the same idea behind. And there's a slight different wording, 21A93. A certification program for the demonstration of compliance in accordance with point 21A20 may be added after initial application, as explained before. So, but the certification program shall come from, and the first proposal of the certification basis shall come from the applicant. As well, if you have, for example, a new technology, and this is not covered at all by the CS, please identify, propose, or raise something, the special condition is needed, for example, because this is not covered at all. Could be one example. Or if you have to request an equivalent safety finding because your design is not covered by the CS, or you would not meet the CS, but actually you would meet the intent of the CS, and then you should indicate already in the cert program an ESF, even if it's maybe not completed yet, but at least there is the need for such thing. And as part of the application, the cert program shall include a detailed technical description, operating characteristics and limitations, intended use of the product or of the change, the kind of operations, and a proposal of the certification basis, including means of compliance and related compliance data. So this is not new, it's just now well described what is expected. Makes things easier for both sides. What is now new related to the risk-based approach and level of involvement? A breakdown of the certification project into meaningful groups of compliance demonstration activities and data to facilitate a risk assessment. And this is the only reason for this grouping. So we discussed quite a bit in the last 2 years about what is this grouping, meaningful grouping, compliance demonstration item. Actually, the only reason to do that is to make on this level risk assessment. It's not more and not less. to make your life easier. Otherwise, you would have to make a risk assessment for each tiny document that you produce, or for the whole project, and for the whole project it might be not meaningful anymore. So therefore this compliance demonstration item, or this grouping of meaningful groups of compliance demonstration activities and data, was invented. And a corresponding proposed EASA involvement at this grouped level. So this is really the final step. What we have seen in the past as well is that there was a risk assessment done, and so there's a certain risk finally, but the proposal where EASA should be involved to witness a certain test or to review a certain compliance data actually was missing. So this is really the last step which we expect for this risk-based involvement approach and from the proposal of the applicant. The certification basis is to be proposed by the applicant as part of the cert program and includes 3 elements: the type certification basis, the OSD certification basis, operations suitability data, and the applicable environmental protection requirements. So these are not any longer in the A part as explained by Michael. It's now in the B part. So the 21B80 is for the type certification basis, CS, special condition, ESF. The point 21B82 is for the operations suitability data certification basis, and the point 21B85 for the environmental protection requirements. So environmental protection requirements, finally, it's always the ICAO Annex 16 in the 3 different volumes. However, these are the 3 paragraphs in the B part defining for the determination of the certification basis. So we provided some clarification on the elements for the establishment of the type certification basis, and it's based on first the CS book that is already in place, if it's applicable to the kind of product that we talk about, and it's the CS book applicable to the product on the date of application. So if you apply today for a Part 25 STC, it would be CS25 at Amendment 23, and maybe according to the 101 process, you revert back, maybe not, but this is the date of application, the first step where we start for the CS and the date of application. And then we have a wording change here. The elect to comply is now called, again, the applicant chooses to comply with the CS. The meaning is still the same, which became applicable after the date of application. So for sure you cannot do it at the date of application because it doesn't exist anymore, but if you should get the next amendment of the CS after the date of application, you can elect to comply that if it makes life easier for you. Secondly, EASA accepts an alternative with the compensating factors providing an equivalent level of safety, so the so-called ESF, equivalent safety finding, with the compensating factors, which should be proposed by the applicant as well. Or the last possibility, we accept or EASA accepts or prescribes other means that demonstrate compliance with the essential requirements, or in case of a restricted type certificate, provide a level of safety adequate with regard to the intended use. So this is what we call a deviation. So you're actually not compliant with the CS, you're even not compliant with the intent of the CS, but you have to be compliant with the essential requirements of the basic regulation, which are in Annex 2. So we cannot go below this. So the FAA, for example, has this kind of exemption to a CS or to a 14 CFR corresponding requirement. This is a possibility EASA or Europe does not have. So we cannot go below the essential requirements. But if we do not comply with the CS, we have still the possibility to go into this deviation route. It's actually rare that we use it, but it's a possibility which is now better clarified in the Part 21 and as well in the AMCGM material. And on top of that, if the CS is not complete, special conditions prescribed by the agency. Again, that the special condition is needed, at least is expected by the applicant to show up, okay, here we are not, the CS is not appropriate or not sufficient, not complete. But finally, this will be written by EASA. So for the issuance of a type certificate, restricted type certificate, major change approval, major repair approval, or supplemental type certificate, the agency will issue it when, if the applicant has complied with all the applicable Section A requirements, so 21A, 21, and, this is no change and new, the agency, through its investigation in accordance with point 21B 100A or B, so this is the level of involvement, risk-based approach, as applicable, has not found any non-compliance with the applicable certification basis. And you see here in the top right corner the B paragraphs. These were are switched from the A part as well. So what was before 21A 103, for example, is now B 103, and so on. What has changed as well? No feature or characteristic has been identified that may make the product unsafe for the users for which certification is requested. So the content is not new. Before, the wording was slightly different. It said something like drücken, press. This was it before. No feature or characteristic makes the product unsafe. So why did we change this wording? Because we have cases where we certified something and there were an unsafe condition in the design already, but it was not identified. So even if the applicant followed part 21 and everybody did his best job or her best job, it was not identified. And this will always happen. We are all humans. So therefore the wording has been corrected or improved to say has been identified. Otherwise, the intent is still the same. New requirements for determining the level of involvement. So to propose the agency involvement as part of the certification program, we have now such requirements documented and included. So they are now explicitly required based on a risk assessment and for the agency's compliance verification. Again, this is not replacing the compliance verification, which is an obligation of the approved design organization anyway. So the independent checking function is not replaced. It's just we have a second verification, our sampling. So while the applicant demonstrates and independently verifies, the agency, before issuing the certificate, has to be convinced that this is performed correctly. So not really changed. This is done by sampling via a second verification, and the past 21 implicitly recognized the non-exhaustiveness of the agency's verification activities, but we had no clear criteria in place for determining the agency's LOI, and it did not reflect safety management principles. So based on this ICANN Annex 19, safety management, this is the first step to include this. So what are the objectives? Clearly to include a risk-based approach to the agency's compliance verification in Part 21. So we want to focus our resources on the certification aspects that pose the higher risks. Usually this should have been the place already before, but now again it's more standardized, better defined, and a qualitative improvement. We have even seen in our advanced application phase that our involvement, at least in these examples, were slightly decreased, maybe due to this effect. It's not the intent. The intent is really to focus on the higher risk areas, not to increase or decrease any involvement, but this was the outcome, at least, of the advanced application. Further objective is to initiate the implementation of ICAO Annex 19, so safety management, and to develop objective criteria and transparent processes to ensure an increased efficiency, controlled processes, and an equal treatment of the applicants. What are the benefits? So the new process forces all of us to invest more time and more effort at the beginning of a certification project. First, in the formalization, which is, by the way, not part of the level of involvement. So for sure we have to familiarize first with the project to be able to determine our level of involvement. So if we talk about our involvement, our formalization is not matched by this. Formalization comes first, and then we talk about involvement. And this means, on average, applicants receive our comments and potentially findings earlier, which makes the life for you much easier as well. So maybe you have experienced this already. If you get the comments from EASA at the end of the project, this is much more expensive to correct them. It creates really pressure on all sides. And this is something we want to avoid by this as well. So you get all our comments, or you should get at least our comments at the beginning of a project, and then it's much cheaper and easier to implement them. And it increases as well the predictability of the whole planning.
I would like to bother you for a few minutes with the legal text, that we have a look into part 21 before we then start looking into more detail on how do we apply these rules. Personally, my experience, every time I read part 21 again, I see something new. I read it from a different perspective. I think I know it by heart, but when I open it, it's again different. Either somebody changes my part 21 overnight, or indeed I have not read it correctly the last time, or I'm very bad in memorizing things. So I think from time to time it's important to look back, look again into the rule text that we think we know. And I would like to use this opportunity here. The text seems pretty long, but I want to highlight to you here the ideas and how the ideas of the risk-based approach that Ralph just explained is embedded, and how you can find them in 21B100 and 21A15. So first, looking at the applicant side, you have an obligation to propose the agency's level of involvement as part of the certification program in 21A15. And the important wording for you is that your application shall include a certification program that consists of, and then we're talking about two numbers in 21A15. The first one is a proposal for a breakdown of the cert program into meaningful groups of compliance demonstration activities and data, including a proposal for the means of compliance and related compliance documents. So there are two elements here. You're going to hear us talking about compliance demonstration items, CDIs, throughout the training. That is the term that we have introduced in the AMC and guidance material to describe the breakdown of the certification program into meaningful groups of compliance demonstration activities. We're going to show to you in much more detail what we mean by that. And then the second important element is that it shall also include the means of compliance and related compliance documents. So it's as part of the cert program, you also should list them as a proposal. And then the risk-based approach based on this meaningful grouping is embedded in the number 6. So what is said there is that you have to make a proposal for the assessment of these meaningful groups of compliance demonstration activities and data. And what is this assessment about? It's a risk-based approach, so you should address the likelihood of an unidentified non-compliance with the certification basis and the potential impact that may have on product safety or environmental protection. So you see here the risk, likelihood versus impact embedded in the rules. That's why we're talking about a risk-based approach. And what is the risk about? Which risks do we want to address here? It's the important element is the likelihood that because we are not involved in the verification, you may miss something through your independent verification exercise with your CVEs, that in the end of the process there is a non-compliance with a certification basis which neither you nor us detected. That's the likelihood that we are addressing, and then looking if this unidentified non-compliance with a cert basis is there, what is the impact on product safety or environment. This is the risk-based approach, how it's being embedded in part 21. And then it guides you to open section B the rules for the competent authority, because it says that you shall take into account at least the elements set out in subpoints 1 to 4 of point 21b100. I'm going to show you in 30 seconds what these 4 points are, and then it concludes that you should not only make this assessment, but then based on this risk assessment that you conduct, you make a proposal how the agency should be involved. Based on this assessment, the application shall include a proposal for the agency's involvement in the verification of compliance demonstration activities and data. The same text seen from the agency's perspective now in section B, rights and obligations for the competent authority. The main point that we are talking about when we are talking level of involvement is 21b100. You'll find very similar wordings there, of course. The agency shall determine its involvement in the verification of compliance demonstration activities and data on the basis of the assessment of the meaningful groups of compliance demonstration activities and data of the certification program. Same wording as for you. We take your proposal and then we'll make our assessment. This assessment shall address the likelihood of an unidentified non-compliance and the potential impact of that non-compliance on product safety or environment. Same wording on our side, of course. And then the point where 21A15 guides you into 21B100, you and us, we should, when making the assessment, consider at least 4 elements. Novel or unusual features of the certification project, the complexity of the design or the complexity of the demonstration of compliance, the criticality of the design related to safety and environmental protection, and the performance and experience of the design organization. So, in short, these 4 terms, we're going to name them: novelty, complexity, criticality, and organization performance. The only thing, and that's where part 21 ends when we're talking about level of involvement. That is what you have to comply with, what we have to comply with. Have to make a risk assessment, likelihood of an unidentified non-compliance, impact on safety or environment, and this assessment by using at least these 4 criteria. But how these 4 criteria are used, how they are combined, how they are related to the likelihood or the impact, this is not said in part 21. All of that is left for us to apply 21B100 and 21A15. And we're going to show you how we think it should be applied, what is an acceptable means, how you can apply this risk assessment, and how to make the proposal on level of involvement to the agency. There is a paragraph C. The paragraph B, please ignore it for a while. I'm going to come back to that this afternoon. There's a paragraph C in 21B100 which puts an obligation on EASA to notify our level of involvement to you. So you will receive a letter, a document from us where we tell you in which compliance demonstration activity and data we want to be involved and to what extent. And in case our involvement changes throughout your certification project, we redo the risk assessment, or you redo the risk assessment and make a proposal to us. If we change our involvement, if we want to see more, if we want to see less, we are also going to update that and also going to notify. So at any stage throughout the project, you know how much EASA will be involved in your certification projects. It's an obligation to us in part 21 to let you know our involvement. And just to summarize this, I'm also going to reuse this slide this afternoon when we are going to talk about minor changes, minor repairs and ETSOs other than APU. We are now talking about the upper part of this slide, and the essence of this slide is whatever subpart we are in. If we're talking about TCs, if we're talking about STCs, about major changes, major repairs, or ETSOs for APU, you have an obligation to make the risk assessment and to make a proposal. And you have here the reference. We are very often, you hear us talking about 21A15 for TCs, but probably more practical relevance are STCs, major changes. You find the same wordings in 21A93, 21A113. So you have the reference here. And for all of that, based on your proposal, 21B100 guides EASA or obliges EASA to establish its involvement and to notify it to you. So same idea in all of these 5 subparts. There's one rule change that is not so obvious that it's related to part 21. Today we have 21A263 point B in the privileges for the approved design organization, which has this wording, the agency shall accept without further verification the following compliance documents submitted by the applicant for the purpose of obtaining the approval of flight conditions, type certificate or approval of major changes, supplemental TC, ETSO authorization or major repair and design approval. Because we have now introduced level of involvement, we don't need that privilege any longer. So one of the changes, we're also going to repeat this tomorrow morning when we're talking about design organization approval. We're talking about the privileges in detail. One of the reasons why we deleted the privilege 21A263B is the fact that the whole purpose is now covered with the LOI concept.
Thanks, Michael. So to shortly remind, the introduction of a documented risk-based level of involvement approach in Part 21 is part of the certification program, and this is part of the application, and this is part of 21A15. So the key to the level of involvement is the risk assessment, on which the LOI determination is taking place. And Part 21 describes explicitly what this risk assessment is about. So now we are coming further into the details. It is the likelihood that a non-compliance with the certification basis remains unidentified. So an unidentified non-compliance. And how likely is it that we have an unidentified non-compliance? Plus the potential impact of that unidentified non-compliance on product level. So on safety or on the environmental protection. So and together this likelihood of an unidentified non-compliance multiplied by the potential impact on the product, this is the risk we are looking for and which shall be proposed by the applicant. So LOI at a glance, we see in green color what the applicant shall propose and in blue color what the EASA determines. So the certification program needs to be broken down into the meaningful groups of compliance demonstration activities and data that we call in the AMC material a compliance demonstration item, which has to be proposed, by the way, from the applicant as well. Then we need the proposal determination of the likelihood of an unidentified non-compliance with the certification basis. And by the way, certification basis in this sense includes environmental protection requirements, OSD certification basis, type certification basis. And this is based on the novelty, the complexity, and the DOA specific performance per meaningful group. That's very important. This has to be done not on the project level, not on a document level. It shall be done on the level of such a grouping of a compliance demonstration item. Next step, a proposal and EASA determination of the impact of such unidentified non-compliance at the product level based on the criticality, again, per meaningful grouping. So then we get a result. It's a risk class 1, 2, 3, or 4. Again, per meaningful group. And finally, a proposal by the applicant or the determination, or not or, and the determination by EASA of the EASA involvement in the verification of the compliance demonstration, activities and data per meaningful group, not per project, based on the risk class. So if it's a risk class 1, we are not involved. If it's a risk class 4, we are highly involved. We come to this in more detail. Any questions or answers? No, the answers you will get. Questions.
I have a question on the application for STCs.
Oh, maybe we can wait a second that you get a microphone, yes. You have to press the mic button.
I have a question about the application for STCs. Is it still required to have a separate application for OSD that is related to an STC, or is that included in the STC application?
Yes, very good question. Unfortunately, we still need this application. We're working on this to get rid of that, but due to the fees and charges regulation which are in place, we still need an application for OSD. However, how we deal with that, so let's assume we have a design change which triggers an OSD change as well. We work on this aspect in one approval, because it doesn't make sense to differentiate them. One is connected to the other one, so therefore you get one approval, and by this approval both projects will be closed. So we write as well only one technical visa internally and make both projects applicable to that. But due to the current fees and charges in place, 2 applications are needed. But we are working on this side, so the next fees and charges regulation, I'm optimistic that this will disappear. So then we have one major change to type certificate or one STC. And if this includes OSD, it includes OSD and is covered by that. But for the time being, 2 applications. Other questions? Yeah. Probably the gray mic button. If it's red, then it works.
Okay, yes. If you have a minor change to OSD, do we have to classify it?
Well, you have to classify it minor. Sorry, I don't understand the question.
If we have a SCC application and it contains minor changes to OSD, do we have to do the risk classification?
That's a very good question. In principle, from the risk-based approach, yes. It goes a bit into this, it's a bit controversial, I see this, and this is based on the fees and charges regulation actually. What we should check is this OSD change necessary for the design change? If yes, it should be part of the overall project and you should identify them and say, okay, this is the risk for this OSD part. So if you already classify it as minor, the risk should be very low and we shouldn't be involved. So the outcome should be finally the same, but it should be included in the overall package. But for the time being, you don't need an application for this minor change OSD.
Okay. If the risk classification says there will be involvement, there's still part 21 that says that EASA is not involved in minor changes to OSD.
Well, part 21 tells that the minor change could be approved under your privilege. It doesn't say we are not involved. This is then indirectly because we don't see it. But if it's part of the overall change, we might be involved, but it's quite unlikely because the risk should be so low that we are not involved. But the point is, if you have, for example, a design change which triggers a change to the MMEL, OSD MMEL, so it might be that the OSD MMEL is more stringent or you're not allowed to fly under MMEL anymore by this change, so therefore we need the connection, it must be part of the same approval. If it's the new possibility of an MMEL, so it's nice to have, you can fly now on MMEL, which was not possible before, then you can see it separately and you don't have to include it into the major change. Does this make sense to you?
Thank you.
Okay.
Hello, Adrian Harrison, Airbus Helicopters. 2 questions, if I may. One easy. Will we have access to this presentation after?
Yes.
Okay. Number 2, maybe outside your scope and not as easy. What would you consider to be a reasonable timescale for feedback from EASA on the level of involvement?
We try to do it inside 4 weeks. This is our internal approach and target. To be honest, we are not always able to do it. It's not rare that we are able to do it, but I wouldn't guarantee it.
4 weeks would be nice.
It would.
One question regarding to the validation of foreign STCs. Has this LOI concept also applicability to that business?
It depends what you think about validation. If we have a bilateral in place, like FAA, that's the most common one, there we have a BASA and a TIP, and this actually is in parallel of the Part 21. So in this case, Part 21 does not apply, it's the bilateral that applies. And in this case, the FAA STC applicant at FAA do not have to comply with this. But anyway, the approach is slightly different because we rely largely on what the FAA is doing. And for the differences of the, for example, the safety emphasis items, we look into more detail in that ones. But this is, you may look like, this is already the risk-based approach up front. So we identified already all the higher risks of unidentified non-compliance based on the fact that we have regulatory differences which are not taken into account by FAA yet. And therefore, it's a different kind of LOI approach. But to answer directly your question, they don't have to consider Part 21 in these cases. If we have no bilateral in place, so maybe working arrangement or nothing, then we apply Part 21 and the foreign applicant would have to take this into account as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I just have a question about the format that the EASA expects to receive these proposals for the level of involvement. Do you have like a consolidated expectation on what format to receive the proposals from the applicants and how you want to kind of provide feedback? Or is it like an open form that it's up to the applicant to decide and then you will just
The latest.
yeah,
It's open. An applicant can freely decide how to do it. You have to be compliant with Part 21. Otherwise, you can take whatever template you like and the form you like. We have seen many different examples in our advanced application phase, and everything was acceptable. So we haven't seen, for example, some people stated compliance for one or the other thing, and others integrated it in the compliance table or in the cert program table. So most of you use a table where you have the requirements, the means of compliance, the title, document reference, the issue of the document reference, and then you could add, for example, the CDI number, which would be a very good idea, but we don't tell you how to do it. There you're free.
But will you involve in this in like the AMC material when you issue it, like a best practice or something like that?
The AMC material is issued already, the AMCGM material, and you find some recommendations, help, what makes sense to make the process quick and easy. But it doesn't say this has to be done in this form.
No, but it's just to kind of present a best practice or something like that.
Yeah, so there are some ideas and recommendations how to do it. And we come to some examples and we will show you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hello.
Yes.
Good morning, Fred Steenberger, Ruach Aviation. Maybe I hope I misunderstood you, but I just heard something disturbing. If a change is classified as minor, so there's basic and is proved under your privilege, are you still expecting to have this risk-based CDI group in your certification plan during your annual review?
I'm happy
Because
that
at the
you
moment I'm not planning for that.
I'm happy that you misunderstood me. No, it's that's not required. The question was if I have a major change or an STC, which includes an OSD minor change, a necessary OSD minor change, which comes together with this STC necessarily. This was the question. Now, if you have a minor change privilege, you do everything under your minor change without all this LOI because we are not involved.
We often cooperate with other design organizations and we subcontract whole design packages, including the showing of compliance and the CVE function to other DOAs. In these cases, who's doing the risk classification and whose DOA performance counts?
Well, since you are the applicant, you have to ensure that this is done. If it's not done by your supplier, you have to do it. It's part of your contract with the supplier. If you transfer this, fine. If not, you have to do it on your own.
So we can use the subcontractor's DOA performance if he has the better performance. And the worse, then we use our performance.
This I give to our DOA colleague.
I was already standing, anticipating me having to answer this question. It's a good question. Look at it like this. If you do, let's say, STC application, there is only one DOA and only one DOA performance. Yes? So if that particular DOA subcontracts part of the work to another organization that happens to have a DOA, that's fine for you as organization. You can take that into account. But ultimately, the single DOA doing the application is responsible for the whole project. That includes risk analysis being performed, either with your own resources or with the resources of the subcontractor. But ultimately, the DOA, being the applicant, is responsible for it all. And within your subcontractor's procedures, that needs to be described on how that is done, how you assure yourself that all that data is generated and checked and valid.
Is it true, even for the cases where we do not even use our CVE signature, the CVE signature of the other DO?
Yes, it's also true then.
My name is Dilek. I am from Etihad Airways Engineering. How EASA will inform the design organization about its level of involvement? What is the tool you are going to use? Will it be in an email or will it be on SEPIAC? Do you have a specific document?
This is actually part of one of our next slides,
Okay.
but I can provide the answer already now. It can be in any way. So the easiest way would be you provide a certification program that includes all this data and we just accept it. And then it could be via SEPIAC accepted. It could be done via your own tool if you have one. In some rare cases we do have. It could be via an email, via a letter, via a certification action item if you have a huge project. Many different ways. At least you get for sure a notification from our side that it is accepted.
Okay, actually, it didn't change. I mean, when we had the level of involvement from a cabin safety expert, for example, we were receiving the information in an email, and then we had an assigned expert from cabin safety, for example, and we were submitting the required documents. I mean, it's the same, right?
More or less, but the level of involvement shall be included, the content inside the certification program. So you don't get an email from the cabin safety expert telling I want to have this and this and this document.
Okay.
Or maybe you get, if it's not already included in the certification program and he disagrees with the proposal, then he would send probably an email at the moment saying, yeah, okay, I agree with that part, but on top of this, I would like to witness a test and I don't need to see the report as proposed by you. This could be done via an email, or if you use already the new tool SEPIAC, in future it could be done via SEPIAC.
Okay, thank you.
Hello. I see on one of the previous presentations that to introduce LOI, that's a change of scope and a Form 82 requirement. Is that still applicable?
So introduction of LOI, we do consider a significant change, so Form 82 is required. I'll spend some more words on that during my presentation on DOA aspects.
Second question, we have an existing STC project which is on hold at the moment. When it's reintroduced, does that mean that we need to apply LOI to it?
There is a practical interim phase. So the way you explain, I would say yes. If we have accepted already certification programs, and we are now in this process, we don't expect that you change something which is already accepted. If something has to be adapted, then you should include this.
Johannes Clementi from Aerodata. I have a question to Robert again. If the design organization has not the capability in one or the other technical aspects, I would say structure, is it possible, or it is possible to take the capability of other design organization for that? And what level of involvement or what capability can be accounted against EASA? If I see, okay, I do not have this privilege and structure, I take that. What is the level of involvement, the classification of know-how?
Okay, I think I understand your question. So when you're asking if I, my own organization, do not have, like, for instance, the structure capability, but I hire the services of another company that does do that, correct, then by that mechanism, your design organization has the capability of doing work on structural aspects. Yes, and we look at you as a design organization then having that capability. And by demonstrating that to us and under the control of your subcontractor procedures, we can then form an opinion about your capability, which is through the contract you have with another organization, but it is assigned to you as a design organization. Yeah.
Okay, if there are no further questions at the moment, I think we just proceed. So how to apply the new approach of LOI determination? This provides actually a very good overview where to find the corresponding AMC GM material to the different topics. So I think if you want to look into the whole topic and learn more about after this roadshow, I think this is a very good slide to say, okay, what do I want to know and where do I have to search it? So the AMC GM material, the new one to part 21, does include more than 10 pages. So to find it quickly, I think this is a good way to do it. So the AMC to 21B 100A and 21A 15B6, which is the same one, explains how to propose the EASA's LOI, and there you find some recommendations, as we discussed just before, for each meaningful group of compliance demonstration, activity and data. By the way, on purpose we say data here and not document, because even if we retain a document which has maybe 1,000 pages, that doesn't mean that we review 1,000 pages. So we review the risk-based data inside, which might be only a few pages of that. And this is done as per points 21A 15B6, 21A 93B3, as well as 21A 113B. So this is all about applications for TC STC, major change, and STCs, and how EASA will determine its LOI on the basis of the criteria established by 21B 100. This is in this AMC part. Then we have the AMC 21A 15B5, which explains the idea of the compliance demonstration item, or this grouping into meaningful groups of compliance demonstration, activity and data. Then we have a guidance material to 21A 15C that provides guidance on how to update the certification program and why, and a guidance material to 21A 20B, which provides guidance on the reporting of unexpected difficulties or events encountered during the certification exercise. So these four are completely new and provides the message in a more extensive way than in our slides today. So additional informative material is the certification memorandum, which was published already on our webpage as well, and which we are going to update this week, next week. At the moment it includes the generic criteria in the generic part for LOI determination, which is applicable to all EASA panels. And this is 99.9% a copy-paste to the AMC-GM material in place. That's why we're going to update and delete that part, that we don't have duplication, and just keep actually the appendices to this certification memorandum, which are more explicit per EASA panel. So you can find there, for example, for the software panel, how to apply this in a more specific way. I see that some people make photos. You can, but you get the presentation anyway afterwards. Fair enough. Yeah, so the generic criteria as in the AMC GM is applicable to each and everything. The specific criteria in the appendices, these are only applicable to the certain EASA panel. To provide you the overall picture from the other side, how to determine the LOI. So what we do need is a proposal of compliance demonstration, data and activities that are retained by EASA. So what does it mean to be retained? We are involved in the compliance demonstration verification or second verification, and for sure you get a feedback from our side. We have to provide a feedback in this case. So therefore we witness a test, we're going to a cabin inspection, we review certain compliance data, and we tell you, well, we have no technical objection of what we have seen, go ahead, we can improve it. Otherwise, if we get something for information, which is still the case, 21A25.7 is unchanged in this area, we can ask for each and any information, which might be useful for continuing airworthiness, for comparison, and ensure equal treatment. But for such cases where we ask something for information only, you don't get a feedback, or at least you shouldn't expect something. In the case of retained data, for sure you get a feedback from our side if this is acceptable from our side or not. So how to get this proposal of involvement in the compliance demonstration data and or activities? We have to identify a risk class. We have actually 4 risk classes. The risk class 1 means no further involvement. Go ahead. In this case, the EASA panel has reviewed the certification program, is happy with what was proposed and what will be presented as compliance demonstration according to the cert program, and there's no further involvement from this panel. At risk class 2, by the way, these are not discrete steps. It's really a flow from a lower risk to a higher risk. So if you're at the lower end of risk class 2, in principle close to risk class 1, we could still say, okay, we don't need an involvement, does make sense. But maybe we want to review, retain a few documents. It's really rare that we participate to any tests. We don't want to exclude it totally, but it's really unlikely. Risk class 3, it becomes more likely that we witness test or go to some inspections. And on top of what would we do for risk class 2, we will review more data. And risk class 4 is the highest risk class, where for sure we are involved. For risk class 3 and 4, we are involved in any case. About the level, it's just more than for a lower risk class. Again, this is just an identifier. It's a risk class identification. We shouldn't put too much into that. It identifies the risk, and based on that, we are more or less involved. Risk class 4, by the way, does not mean that we are 100% involved. This is impossible. But it's the highest risk we can imagine. So how to identify this risk class? By the assessment of the likelihood of an unidentified non-compliance and its criticality. So you see here the small pictures of the tables, which we will see in a bigger form on another slide later on. But you have to go through this list about novelty, complexity, criticality, and the performance, and based on this you come to a risk class. So we assess the likelihood of an unidentified non-compliance and its criticality on product level so how to do it? By using the 4 criteria as provided by part 21, as shown by Michael. These are novelty of the CDI, of this group, meaningful grouping. Is there something novel inside? Is there something complex inside? What is the performance of the involved panels actually. So you get a specific performance per structural panel, per cabin safety panel. What is the performance and what is the criticality? So what is the worst case failure scenario if you have an unidentified non-compliance on product level? And if you have done this, the process is complete. But again, in the further slides, we come more and more in detail about all the subjects. So the preparation of LOI proposal. So according to point 21A15B5, as a first step, the applicant has to propose a breakdown of the certification program into meaningful groups of compliance demonstration activity and data, and we call this in the AMC GM material a compliance demonstration item. Again, why do we group this into CDIs? It's just a tool to facilitate the risk assessment at a meaningful level. So to avoid that we have to make a risk assessment for each document, we have this tool to group something together and have less risk assessments. So the reason is just to save time, to save efforts. The whole thing should be done as quick as possible. We don't want to create a monster here. By this, we haven't improved safety yet. It's just where should we be involved in the most risky item. So that's why recommendation, let's do it in the best way from both sides to get this quickly done and not use too much time on that. So the grouping of compliance demonstration activities and data into CDI. Here we have some recommendations how we could do it. It could be done per panel, per EASA panel, for example. It could be done per discipline. So by the way, we have 19 EASA panels here. I think for no one of you, all 19 panels are applicable, would be quite impossible. And each panel, or most of the panels, have extra disciplines, so more explicit technical areas of work. If we take, for example, panel 4, hydromechanical system, this is for doors, it's for flight controls, it's for landing gears. They're really completely different items technically. And therefore we have there several disciplines per such a panel. This is not necessarily the case, but in most of the panels this is the case. And at the moment, our panel performance that we provide to you is just per panel. In future, it might be as well per discipline, but this I think depends as well on the size of your company. We could do this as well per ATA chapter, which some companies do. It's quite useful as well, or per means of compliance. So you have different possibilities and you are free. So do it in the most meaningful way that you can imagine for your company, for your project. So we are quite flexible on this and do this in the best way for your company, as it makes most sense, most meaningful. It may result in various sizes, natures and compositions of such CDIs, compliance demonstration items, but it should group meaningfully related items. So if you have a complete aircraft and say, yeah, I group everything together and my aircraft is one CDI, this would be a case where we would disagree. We haven't seen such a strange case yet, but everything what we have seen in the advanced application phase was acceptable for us. So no problem in principle, but there is an end of meaningfulness. But you could even say, for me, it's meaningful to do it really per compliance demonstration document. Some companies did so. Doesn't sound like the most clever way in principle, but in some cases it makes sense because there were only a few documents and it was easier to make the risk assessment on the level of a document instead of grouping them and something else. So it's again up to you how to approach that. On simple projects, it might be as well, the whole project might be one compliance demonstration item. We have seen this as well, and this might make sense. If you have a very small change, why not making this as one CDI? So when grouping into large CDIs, which may trigger the involvement of several panels, what we do recommend is that the applicant identifies which parts of the CDI affects which panel. This is not required by Part 21, but it's a good recommendation by the AMC material. And again, to make this process quick and easy for both sides, I really recommend do this per panel, because maybe the performance is different per panel. If everything is the same for all panels, you could do it even together. But mention explicitly the EASA panels. This makes it much easier for us, and then the whole process is quicker by that, which should be the target. So here, for example, on the left-hand side, how does the here you have different requirements. So and in these requirements, you see here, I don't know what TOR means, but at least these are the panels 5 and 6, and you see here, for example, this is the compliance demonstration item, and we have here 1, 2, 3, 4 times the same CDI covers several requirements, several panels. And in such a case, it would make sense to identify really the panels as it was done here, to make it clear already for our expert colleagues, not to guess too much and to ask backwards questions, and have the level of involvement quickly determined by us. So we have 3 steps for determining the LOI using the risk-based approach and the 4 criteria in part 21. The first step is to identify the likelihood of an unidentified non-compliance. How to do this? Via the criteria, novelty, complexity, and the DOA performance. DOA performance here is slightly misleading. It's really the performance per involved panel. So if you have now whatever an avionics change, so usually it's panel 6 for avionics, it's maybe panel 10 for software, and flight panel to make the flight test. So 3 panels are involved. Therefore, it makes maybe sense to make 3 CDIs out of it, or at least to identify these 3 panels in 1 CDI of the subject, because the performance, the DOA performance, might be 3 different ones. Maybe flight is high, avionics is medium, and software is low, or something else, and therefore you have different risk classes per these 3 panels, and this should be taken into account. The second step, criticality. So what is my potential impact of an unidentified non-compliance on the product level? And with this criticality, we will see it later in the table you have shortly seen before. You go to the third step. So with the second step, you have now the risk class, 1, 2, 3, 4. And with this risk class, you go into the third step to propose the identification of data and activities which should be retained by EASA for our involvement. And identify, okay, retained by EASA as proposed or not retained.
So here you see a good example. Part 21 doesn't classify the 4 criteria. It only says you have to use the 4 criteria to make your risk assessment. What you'll find in the AMC here is that we would accept it as an acceptable means of compliance to use novelty, complexity, and DOA performance to determine the likelihood, and the criticality to determine the impact. That's a bit the idea of how the 4 criteria were built. And then, based on that, you do make your risk assessment. Do you have any questions so far? The concept of CDI, is it clear to you, this overall picture?
If you may wait for the microphone. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Dwayne from Bain Simmons, Dwayne Kritzinger. What criteria are you using for the potential safety impact at product level? Are we talking 1309 style criteria?
We will come to that in the next slides, and that's part of it, yes. If you have a catastrophic or hazardous failure classification, this would make it critical, for example. But we will see further examples in the next slides.
How will the DOA performance be made available to the DOA?
This is a question actually for Rob, but as long as he's not at the mic, I could answer, or do you wish? No, he has, okay.
In a few minutes in the slides. Yeah, we'll get to that later.
A good point. In the case that you have a change with a very low to no level of involvement from EASA, You already brought up the topic audits. Is this now going to be then an audit item for your annual surveillance? Because at the moment it's only looked at minor changes, but will now also be major changes with low level of involvement be reviewed? And
Yes.
You're so predictable.
Yes, thanks, Fred. Not too different from the past, really. We were looking at STCs and not only your STCs process, but also, at least I can speak for myself when I say during my audits, when I look at an STC, I look particularly at documents that were not reviewed by the agency. Now, identifying such documents today or in the past may have been a bit more difficult, a bit more tricky, because we didn't write down the level of involvement as we're now requiring, and it makes it a lot more clear. So, but do expect some questions to be asked on topics you've done under, before we would used to have said under privilege, under the 263B privilege, but today under the LOI concept, where the agency did not elect to look at a certain bit of data.
I was expecting that. Will that change the scope of of your audit? Will there be more specialists come in?
We're building up that case, but our resources are limited. Of course, we can do that in a number of ways. Of course, we'll still bring specialists to the audit when we need to. But what we also can do, and that's is the usual way of doing it, is if there's unclarity or if we feel an expert needs to look at something, we can bring the document back, have a short chat with the expert, rather than having the expert travel all the way to a company and back again. Takes up an enormous amount of time. So we can do quick checks with them. And of course you will be informed of that.
Thanks. That's exactly what I want to provoke a bit, these practical questions, so please forgive me. Anything else you want to know now, or are you ready to continue? Then let's dive deeper. So before the coffee break, Ralph presented you the 3 steps on how to make your LOI proposal, and now through these three steps we're going into more detail and show you how to apply the criteria in order to come to your risk assessment. Stefano.
So good morning everybody, I'm Stefano Fico. I'm a PCM, senior PCM for initial awareness. I work for GA products. I was part of this exercise from the beginning. So I take over from what Ralph left, and I will guide you more into the details of how this assessment will be done by you to make your proposal of the LOI, and by us to make our determination of the LOI. So I would like to catch your attention on this slide. It's very important. Whatever it will come now on, it's a detail of these 3 steps. So the first step that we will do is how do we assess the likelihood of an unidentified non-compliance. Then through the assessment of the criticality, which is the link to the potential impact on the safety, we will determine the risk classes. So the matrix that you see small will be bigger in the next slides. And then the last step, which is very important, as Ralph mentioned before, is the final determination of the level of involvement. So the first step is the assessment of the likelihood. You have heard novelty. Novelty, it's in part 21, so it's a requirement. We have to use novelty as one of the items to define our LOI, and the same is you have to do when you make your proposal. In the sake of this, in the frame of this exercise, novelty can be of 2 different values, novel or not novel. We are talking here, of course, about the CDI, so please remember what Ralph mentioned before. We have a CDI because that is the level where you will decide to make the risk assessment. So you will have to do the assessment whether a CDI is either novel or not novel. What means novel? Keep in mind the link to likelihood. So we are assessing what could be novel in the meaning that may have an impact of the likelihood that an unidentified non-compliance may occur. Novelty is, I would say, I would start from the direct meaning of this word, novel. So what we are looking at is something that can be novel for your organization. It brought from design, technology up to requirements. So whatever can be novel for your organization or for that specific panel in that specific CDI, that should be marked as novel. You will see in the next slide some examples of what novelty means. It's linked for sure to what you see here. So technology, operation, installation, means of compliance. If you have new requirements that you never worked with, if you have new means of compliance, if there is a new special condition that you have never applied, this will be novel for us, for you. It may be novel as CDI also if this is something where you are very expert, but this is something new for the agency. So this is also a dimension that we have to take into account. So in this two-party discussion, whatever it's novel should be marked as novel. It's very important also that you consider the last time where you address that specific aspect. So if there is an element of design, a specific installation that it's not novel to you, but for example, you have done it 3 years ago, so it might be that something has been lost in the meantime, then you should mark it as novel. And in any case, for all of the classification that you will see from now on, you can always take at the beginning a conservative classification, and then this can change during the project. You will see here some example of novelty. So as I think I mentioned most of them, but if we want to go through them, if there is a new equivalent safety finding, if there is a new deviation that you have never applied, if you're applying new industry standards that are out of the your previous recent experience, that should be marked as novel. Of course, this is always something that we can discuss. If you have any doubt, you can make the first proposal. It will be reviewed by us, and then we can see how it becomes. But it's important that we receive your first assessment. And you will see that as part of all of this classification, you will have to provide some justification to support your classification. In some cases, it may be quite obvious. In other cases, you have to really explain and say why you think that that CDI is not novel for you. You see, Ralph is with the microphone.
Yeah, maybe as a small add-on, and the number of examples is for sure not exhaustive here, and all the examples here relates to the requirements, to the interpretive material, to standards. Actually, novelty can mean as well your technology that you use. If you use, for example, first time a complete new aluminium alloy from a structural perspective, or a new composite structure, this would trigger as well novelty. It's not only the compliance demonstration itself, it's as well what you have in the design and in your technology. So for sure each change is a kind of novel, otherwise you wouldn't apply for the change, but it's more from a technology perspective. So don't consider only the compliance demonstration and regulation, it's really what is the change about? Is there really this the first time for you that you apply that? And maybe novel for the agency means really novel for the agency. Novel for one expert is not meant as novel for us. It would be really novel for the agent on agency level.
The next element of the assessment of the likelihood is complexity. So in this case as well, we have two possible values. A CDI can be either complex or not complex. Complex is more linked to the complexity of the compliance demonstration, and this may then be linked also to the complexity of the design. So normally a complex design, a complex system with a lot of interfaces, this can be driving to a CDI which is complex, but normally the starting point is what is the effort for the applicant to make such compliance demonstration. Some example of complexity are compliance demonstration, for example, where you may have a subjective assessment. Human-machine interface is one example. Some of the pilot assessment are also one example. Interpretation of results, test results, when you don't have clear pass-fail criteria or there is a need of interpretation of them, this may also be complex. When you have several panels with a lot of interfaces as part of a CDI, I would say for some of the GA companies, for example, a 1309 assessment might be a complex example of CDI. So, but this is, I think, most of the variety and diversity of cases that we have in mind when we came up to this. it is normally not dependent from the experience and the performance of the applicant. So an item, a CDI or a certain topic is complex, and if it is assessed as complex, should be complex for all. So it's not linked to a certain company respect to another company. Some example here, yeah, complex or highly integrated system requiring more efforts from the applicant. This is another example. And as I mentioned before, requirements of subjective nature. As for the novelty, if there is a doubt in the beginning, you can go for a complex assessment, and then this can be changed afterward. If during the discussion with the agency, for example, it is acknowledged that that level of complexity it is actually scaled down and downgraded. But in case of any doubt, just go for a conservative assessment.
Maybe one experience to be shared. One of the mistakes most often done is about the differentiation between complexity and novelty. So I've seen several times that applicants declared something as not complex because they are so experienced and it's not new for them. But this is actually here not the aspect. If it's not new for them, it's not novel. Complexity is completely independent from your performance and completely independent if it's novel or not. It's really if you have a requirement of subjective nature, something shall be easy and obvious. So this is subjective. Ask 5 people, you get 6 answers. So this complexity is not changed by your experience. It's still considered as complex. So please take this into account. If something is complex, it stays complex, independent of high performance and non-novelty. This is something I've seen quite several times.
And I would like also to add, when you have a doubt for both novelty and complexity, remember this is linked to the likelihood of a non-compliance. So make yourself the question, how this can this be complex to a level that it increases the likelihood of a non-compliance? I think it's a link that can help you when you make such an assessment. It will help you to provide the related justification, and also it will help us to make our assessment and see if we agree or not with you. So these are the first 2 components. The third one, I leave it to Robert. It's about performance of the organization.
Thank you, Stefano. Yes, on the performance of the organization, we have 3 possible outcomes. So low, medium, and high. We score the design organizations in low, medium, and high. And as already mentioned, we do that not only as an overall design organization performance figure, but also on the panel level. More to that later. We do have a different approach for non-DOA holders. We'll get to that on the last slide, on this bit. So, performance of the design organization holder. I hope the colorful picture in the middle is not new to you, at least those who have a design organization that in which you do STCs or TCs. This is what should have been shared with you by the DOA team leader. This is a graphical input on where your performance currently is rated at, and we create this picture on a yearly basis. So we collect data in overall in two ways. One is from doing our assessments at your premises during audits. We look at how well you comply with Part 21. If you do things under privilege, how well that is done. Is there any findings? Is there any comments? Is there any room for improvement? So the scoring is done on that, and then the scoring is done on the applications. If you, for instance, apply for an STC, you have a successful STC project ended in a certificate. We ask for the scores of the PCMs and the experts involved in the project on how well you did in that project. And just to be clear on that, of course, the PCM and the experts are all very satisfied at the end of the project, because that's when you get your certificate. But we rate you on the data you submit to us on the first time, basically. Yeah. So would we not have seen that data? Would there have been mistakes in that, or a need for discussion or further development? That's the way we score things, and we do that over a number of criteria. The tool is called the DOA dashboard, and it should be, as a question from you, Peter, earlier on, how do we get the data? It is within the DOA dashboard. And the DOA dashboard has the option to do to look at the data in the sense of overall DOA performance, but also a per panel performance. Yeah, we have to understand that if you do one STC per 3 years, we have to look at the data in that way, right? So a statistical basis is very slim in that case. Maybe there were only a few panels involved in the project. So we have to realize that when we are looking at DOA performance and when you are taking your own DOA performance into account when making the LOI proposal and doing the risk analysis. Of course, if you match the way you build up your CDIs with panels, you can easily take the panel performance. If you do it differently, you need to structure the data such and take those inputs and make again a meaningful DOA performance applicable to the particular CDI. So we update the dashboard currently on a yearly basis. You will get the data on a yearly basis. We also have the option to provide you with detailed feedback data, so the per project data over the categories we have, but that needs a memorandum of understanding in place. So it's a document that it just says, and it bears the signature of your head of design normally, and our head of design organizations department, that says we will use the data in good faith. We won't start calling an expert and saying you rated us low, and then words I should not use here in this room. That's not the point. It's the point of it is to learn, to do better, to understand why things were a bit difficult maybe in an STC, and to be able to improve. Yeah. So if it's done with that understanding, that bears the signature then of those two parties, then we can provide you with the detailed performance data. And as already mentioned, you use this to determine your LOI, and the way how we put things together will come in the next few slides. I think I can start repeating myself here. So communicated from us to you based on audits, based on performance in projects. And yes, you do have the option if your overall, let's say, Avionics rating is medium, but you have always excelled in doing TOS system, installation of TOS system, the Avionics element of that. You've always excelled in that, and we know that. You can make that case to us. You can say, well, for this particular CDI within this new product where I'm installing this new system, my performance actually is high. For us to agree on that, but if we agree, we can definitely accept that. Yeah. So again, common sense needs to apply. We don't want to take raw data figures, do an average, and don't think anymore. Let's all keep thinking on this and make this into what was already said. How do we know that we have an unidentified, or the likelihood of an unidentified non-compliance? By having good performance in the DOA, we can minimize the risk there. And if that's the case, then of course we're willing to listen, and we're not spending our time on reviewing such documents or such data. Behind the performance data gathering is a system that produces something like this. This is data you can get directly from your DOA team leader without the MOU. If you want to click this pointing here at these pluses here, that develops all the projects that are below that requires the MOU, and then you get per project the specific data. Yeah, and that also makes it possible for you to relate to the EASA team that did that project. So there we are a bit more cautious with sharing that data. For other DOAs, sorry, yeah. Sure.
So I think it's important to understand this dashboard serves at least three purposes actually. The one is the overall organizational oversight, where you need the scope and the level of activity of the organization and put that in relation to the performance. Second purpose is to determine the performance for your future projects for your LOI. And the third one is, as Rob mentioned, to support you in improving your organization, see where you are performing less good, and then improving there. But from the perspective of LOI, the second element, you only need to know where in the scale you are on the vertical line. So you can't forget about the horizontal line, the scope and level of activity. It doesn't matter whether you're left or right. It only counts the performance, whether it's low, medium, or high. The horizontal dimension is only relevant for your overall DOA oversight purposes.
Yes, and from that vertical element, for the moment, on LOI and determining the level of involvement, we take only the feedback from certification, so which is depicted as a red dot. In this particular example, it's in the medium. The overall takes an overall view of you as a DOA, taking into account the results from audits. But for the LOI determination, we take the certification dot identified by the red color. For non-DOAs, so ADOAs or companies demonstrating their eligibility through a cert program, we don't have such a system. We are not gathering this information at the moment, and therefore we list the DOA performance as unknown. We don't know enough about the organization. We don't know enough about the way in which you're organized. It lacks the audits that we do at your organization, etc. So in this case, we just live with an unknown there, and that features then in the ultimate calculation as well. Any questions on DOA performance?
Quick question. For ADOAs, is it taken into account whether the same organization also has a DOA?
So no, we do make a clear distinction between the two. Yeah. Yeah. Any other quick questions? Hopefully. Okay, thank you.
So with the DOA performance, we have completed what we have defined as the assessment of the likelihood. So to recap, DOA performance, novelty, complexity. These are the three values which says how likely it is that an identified non-compliance may occur. The next steps is on the assessment of the criticality. Again, we go back to two possible values. So a CDI can be either critical or not critical. You will recognize some of the criteria. So to answer to the question that came before, under the 39 assessment, if a CDI touches something which is either hazardous or catastrophic, that would be a critical CDI. Other aspects are human-machine interface. So if something touches HMI in a not negligible way, this will make the CDI critical. If there is an airworthiness limitation, if there is an AD linked to that CDI, these are all examples of things which may make the CDI critical. Some of these criteria are might remind you of the criteria for the 21A91 assessment, so minor, major. The idea is not that a major change is by definition always critical. It's just that some of the criteria are similar, so we don't have to make this shortcut. Within a major change, within an STC, there can be CDI which are not critical. And also here it's important, as we said before, whenever you have a doubt, if you are unsure, first of all, you can always talk to us and say, what do you think, guys? Is this for your evaluation critical or not? Or if you want to take a direct decision, go for a conservative choice, and this can be changed. As you've seen in the beginning, the LOI is not something that we write in stones and it cannot be changed during the project. It can be changed. It should change to reflect the real status of the project, so you can always do it. Okay? So now finally we have the matrices in a visible way. Follow me on the two metrics. So we start from the one on the top left corner. This is linked to the likelihood of an unidentified non-compliance. And you will see that on the horizontal dimension you have novelty and complexity. On the vertical dimension you have the DOA performance. So if a CDI was assessed as novel, complex, novel and complex, novel but not complex, you have three possible scenarios. You combine this with the DOA performance. As you remember, this may have been high, medium, or low unknown. The combination of the two gives the likelihood of unidentified non-compliance, which can range from very low to low, medium, high. You take this information, go into the second matrix, you put the likelihood on the horizontal dimension, you combine now with the criticality, and that gives you one of the four classes. So class 1, 2, 3, or 4. This is how you go from the novelty, complexity, DOA performance, criticality to the determination of the risk classes. As we said before, this is not done. You still have to do something to propose the level of involvement. But before doing that,
if you don't like this two steps approach, if you don't want to translate the information from step 1, the likelihood, into the second matrix in the second step, in the certification memorandum on level of involvement, you'll also find an attachment, the very last attachment, which combines this risk matrix in one single table. It's then a bit bigger, of course, but there you can immediately, with the different alternatives, pick your final risk class. Depends a bit on your preference how to work.
So as we mentioned before, in case your organization is an ADOA, so if there is no knowledge on the performance of the organization, then the two matrices may be merged into one, and this would be the resulting one. But you see, you can directly take novelty, complexity, and criticality. So this information directly drive you to the risk classes. In this case, class 1 is not a possible solution to the equation, so it would be from class 2 up to 4. The next step, so now we have determined the classes, we have this information, we have a number for each CDI, don't forget that. You have to provide such assessment for all the CDIs which constitute your certification program. What does it mean in terms of involvement? We had a lot of discussion on this. How can we translate the numbers into the detailed activities? Of course, when we talk about detailed activities, we are talking about review of documents, review of compliance data. Document is just one mean to convey compliance data, but one can focus on specific compliance data, test witnessing, audits. These are all type of involvement of the agency. And this is what we need to see. For each CDI, we need to see which element of the certification program, which is part of that CDI, you are proposing for us to be involved. And you see, the AMC is not going beyond this definition, which might sound to you at the first glance as quite vague. The only clear risk class is risk class 1, because there it's only the review of the certification program. That's easy. So in that case, we familiarize, we review the CERT program. The CERT program includes your proposal of LOI. If we agree that for a specific CDI, the LOI, the risk class is 1, we are done. So we leave it up to you to continue, and then of course demonstrate compliance, verify, provide your declaration, and then we will issue the approval. For risk class 2, 3, and 4, it's organized in a way it's a little bit more. So risk class 2 means review of some compliance data. Risk class 3 means 2 plus something, and the same is 4. Of course, imagine this not as a discrete change, is more a continuum. So within risk class 2, within a CDI of a risk class 2, you have possible combination of compliance data that you can propose for us to be involved. And this depends on the CDI, and this is where you can make a proposal for us to review. We agreed at the end to leave it so flexible because a CDI can be of really different nature. So we think it's important that you take the chance to make a proposal of which are the areas where you think that we should be involved within that risk classes, and then it will be for us, of course, at the end to make our final decision. If I can give an example, if within a CDI of risk class 2 you are proposing one document and we think, no, we should review 5 documents, then maybe the risk class 2 was not the right one. So we would have to discuss about assessment before. But a change of decision that we can easily make could be that instead of reviewing that document that you are proposing, we think it's more important that we review another document. So take it as an example. I think Ralph wants to say something.
Yeah, maybe I want to make aware of, we have one kind of exception inside this risk-based approach and risk assessment and involvement classification. So in case of a major change to EASA approved document like the flight manual or the airworthiness limitation section, if you would have a CDI including a flight manual change, but based on your high performance you won't end up at risk class 1. So yes, risk class 1, no involvement, but the exceptions are still valid. So the flight manual, EASA approved, still has to be provided to us. This is one exception I want to make you aware of.
There are also other exceptions. You will find them in the AMC. Yeah, I think I've covered more or less the content of the slides. As I said before, the LOI means retain data that we are deciding that it will stay with us. So in this case, you have to expect a feedback from our side. This is the meaning of retain. But don't forget that you don't have to necessarily link your proposal of retain data to a compliance document. You can have, for example, a document of 1,000 pages where you believe that only a specific chapter is meaningful for our involvement. You can make such a proposal. So you can even identify part of a document or part of a certain compliance data. Okay. As we have mentioned before, there are attachments at the moment in the certification memo for the LOI. These attachments, from what I think I understood, Michael, they will stay in the new revision of the certification memo. This will be the only piece of information. What you will find in these attachments is for each panel, the 19th panel that we have as of today within EASA, you will find examples of novelty, complexity, criticality, and also examples of what kind of data a certain panel would expect depending on the classes. So this is an information that also you can use to make your proposal. Also in this case is not written in stone, so make your assessment, but these are a guidance that you can also consider to make your proposal of the LOI. And what you see here, I think it's for a panel 6, and it's an example of what for panel 6, depending on the classes, should be retained data. So if you have an avionic CDI or a CDI where avionic panel is involved, depending on the class, you can consider this example to propose which data we should review. Okay?
It is meant as guidance, so it doesn't mean that in all the cases where you end up with risk class 3, you have to provide the AFHA, for example. So take this as a guidance. You can deviate from that. Also, EASA may at some point deviate from that. And what we also try to ensure is, even though not consistent throughout all panels, and that's why you have 19 different examples, one per panel, we try to bring in some harmonization, that it's logic, it's clear that for a certain panel these kind of documents are required. So you find there some consistency, but also some deliberate inconsistency of that a certain document may be required for one panel but not for the other one.
So what we have said so far is true for all products for which EASA is responsible. What we did for some of the products within a general aviation understanding, I have to say like that because, as you know, there are several definitions of GA. So within the scope of this 21 B100 assessment, what we have identified that for simple products, and in this case simple products mean everything except 25, 27, 29, and CS23 commuter or level 4 according to the new amendment 5. So excluding these products, you can do your LOI assessment just using the AMC to part 21, the AMC and the guidance that you've seen so far. So the message is you don't need to use the attachments except for those panels which are mentioned here, which is noise, propulsion, DASA, OSD, and software and airborne electronic hardware. Why made such exclusion? Because for those panels we identified that the criteria necessary to make the assessment are quite specific. So even for those simple products, if there is any of this panel which is involved, that you would have to consider the additional guidance in the cert memo. No?
Yeah, short add-on. Please don't take this simple products not as a clear definition. This is the best we could summarize for the means of the LOI certification memorandum, how to apply it. For sure it's not a 100% definition of what we would call a simple product. Yeah. It's just for this means how to apply the attachment for the cert memo.
Yeah, and also I would add that when we say you don't need to consider the panel, it's not that you cannot. So you can, if you find some useful guidance in the attachments, even for what we identify here as a simple products, this you can do. We received question, for example, there are some airplanes which are not commuter, but they could be at a level of complexity like commuter. So should we not use the guidance additional from the attachment? In that case, the answer is yes, of course. If you find good elements, or if you find good elements in those attachments, we can always do. But the same could be the other way around. There are some commuter which are maybe simpler in their design than non-commuter aircraft, and in that case, if agreed by EASA, you don't need to apply that specific text of the attachments. Okay, so this is guidance for you to use to make your assessment and proposal, and for us to use to make our final determination. What we also have considered for general aviation and small and medium enterprises, the AMC allowed to use proportionality in the assessment when you look at simpler products. So the same criteria can be applied in a proportional way. This is an important information. And also what we are working on is to provide some examples of LOI for simple products, well, not simple in the meaning of before, but really simple and conventional design. For those of you who are familiar with GA products, there is such a definition in the CS23 and the CSVLA. So in those cases that will be clearly explained in the guide, in the examples, you will find examples of LOI proposal. The reason why we have done it is because we have recognized that for specific products and where there is a certain simplicity, companies may have still problem to make such a proposal of the LOI. As you know, it may be the case that they have no DOA or they have an APDOA, so their experience with certification is not that high as a DOA, so we try to do something to simplify their effort to make a proposal of the LOI. And these examples will be provided on the EASA website. We are working on it right now, and I think by the end of the year they should be available. Please.
So if I go back one slide,
yes,
to the definition of simple product.
Yeah.
So looking at the definitions of simple products there, CS23 level 1, 2, and 3, but if you're making an avionics change, almost all avionics has software or electronic hardware, and then by default they're kicked out of simple. Is that how I'm reading that?
So it's still simple, but you would have to consider for that part of the CDI which involves software, the corresponding guidance. It really makes sense because for what we did during the exercise of the LOI is we reviewed the attachment and we transferred to the AMC a lot of generic criteria which are valid across the panels. And this works very well for most of the panels, but not for all the panels. And software is a very good example. The way you define the LOI is quite different from the rest of the panel. So that's why, regardless of what is the product, even if it's a drone, that's a typical example that we receive. Is a drone a simple product? I think it depends on the type of drone, but if software is involved, it might be involved, and also DASA is another example. There you have to consider the attachments, but only for that specific CDI.
I think the idea is the exclusion. So for simple products, as you can see, software is applicable. What's not applicable is, for example, the appendix for avionics. And if we read through the avionics part, we had the example some slides before. This, for the most of the simple product, this attachment doesn't make sense. If you try to apply it, you will fail probably. And that's why we said, okay, which are applicable in any case, for simple, for any product, and which maybe do not make sense. So we don't want to force applicants to provide something which is simply not applicable. But if you find it applicable, feel free to use it.
Yeah. So it's not a wall. You can play with it. And to develop a little bit further on the example that we are providing for general aviation, what you will find in this example is really taking, for example, a TC project. We propose there a splitting of the certification program into CDI, and then for each CDI we make directly the assessment of novelty, complexity, criticality. We consider, of course, also the design performance, which is known or low in that case. And then we say what is the risk class and what is the detailed proposal of involvement for the agency. So it's a, let's say, it's an exercise that we have done ourselves under the assumption that we have considered a very simple and conventional design. So, for example, single engine, not only VFR-day, so this kind of simplification, and there you will find directly proposal. The aim is that the company can take such example, either apply as it is, of course there is some conservatism in it, or take it as a starting point to make then their proposal for the level of involvement. Do you have any question?
Thank you. Crawford Murray from Part 21 Solutions. Who is actually determining the acceptance of the cert plan and the level of involvement? Is it EASA generically? Is it the PCM? And what happens when that's been delegated to an NRA like the CAA? It was brought up at the last STC side meeting that the CAA were ignoring all this and just going for full involvement. So where's the responsibility?
So the formal acceptance of a certification project is coming from the PCM, and usually he doesn't do this alone. So he has his team and the affected panels, and what usually is done is that the PCM asks all the involved panels first to familiarize, and the familiarization, after the familiarization, each expert should accept the certification program from his or her panel perspective, saying, okay, the requirement, the means of compliance, all the method of compliance is adequate to demonstrate compliance, is fully compliant with Part 21, and the summary is then done by the PCM, and the PCM announces then to the applicant cert program accepted.
Okay, so that's good, thank you. But if it's then delegated to an NRA, what authority does the EASA have to make sure that NRA is following the LOI process?
National Aviation Authorities? Yes. Well, then it's still the PCM. They're working. We are one team. So if we say it's a PCM from Austro Control or whoever, then he takes the decision. The NAA has to work according to the same procedures as we do. That does make a difference.
Okay, thank you.
There is no committee of EASA which takes the decision on the LOI for each project. So it's a team decision who is working on the call.
And the colleague from the NAA, in that moment where he acts as PCM in a certification project, he has the EASA hat on. He is not the NAA hat. He follows our procedure, not the NAA's procedure. But you mentioned that in previous cases, so we're gradually now starting to apply level of involvement. And we had some advanced application projects to test it a little bit. You will hear a couple of words later on these projects. But certainly, we are also in a learning process. And it can happen that one colleague within EASA or one colleague in an NAA still is not yet fully up to speed. We're training everybody. We're trying to be ready for March, but it can happen. So.
Further questions? Okay. So proposal of LOI inside the certification program, if not obvious, the proposal of the applicant should be accompanied by justification for each of the LOI determination criteria. So usually there should be a justification provided. Why is something novel or not novel? Why is something complex or not complex? And why is something critical or not critical? For the DOA performance, it's easy. You start with what you get from EASA. We may determine the performance differently, which is not very likely, but it may happen. If you have, for example, your performance is high, and we see in the formalization phase that everything goes wrong as it could go wrong, then we would adapt this. Or the other way around, if you have an unknown performance and we see during the formalization that you're perfectly aware about the whole topic, then we say, okay, it's not unknown, we are medium high. So we can adapt in this case. But usually the performance will be taken as you are informed by our DOA team colleagues. If any of the elements required by point 21A15 or similar are missing, so the risk assessment, the LOI proposal, etc., the application will not be further processed by EASA. So it's not that that we are just quiet and nothing happens. You will be informed by us if something is missing, but it goes into what I said at the beginning. The certification program, the risk assessment is part of the application. If this is not complete, we are stuck. So we have to adapt the certification program that it is acceptable, and then we can further proceed. But in any case, we will inform you, and if we see that, assume you have determined something as novel, and we say no, it's not, or the other way around, we will tell you and justify why we have a different position. This is the question we had already. So we have the obligation to notify each applicant about the retained compliance demonstration data and activities via the acceptance of the certification program. And this we can do, we provide already the examples via ZEPIAC, via an acceptance of a specific form proposed by the applicant, by a certification action item, as we do it for huge projects usually. It could be a formal letter or just an email. So any kind of information in a written form could be the notification, but in any case you will get a notification. If we disagree with the applicant's proposal for LOI, we will adjust it. We will notify you about that and include a short justification, explanation of these aspects where we deviate from the proposal and why. And maybe one important point, the LOI determination is not a decision in the sense of Article 108 of the basic regulation. What does it mean? There's no possibility to appeal. And if you think about it, it makes sense. It's just we want to determine on a risk-based approach where we should be involved. If you're not happy with our involvement, bad luck, but it's our involvement. So there is no right to appeal for that. So in case of difficulties or events encountered during the compliance demonstration, we have seen that you have the obligation to inform us about it. And if it has an appreciable impact on the determined LOI, we will reassess our involvement based on this new information. You have the obligation to inform us. This is now in point 21.820b clearly described. And at any stage of the project, we are entitled to reassess the LOI determination if warranted. So if we change it, for sure we will and have to justify why we change our mind, because we have seen that the flight test program is written not in the way we expected or whatever, or maybe something is much better than expected and that's why we reduce our involvement. So in both directions that's possible, and this might happen at any stage when we have additional information. This process should follow the same process as for the initial LOI determination, so it's again based on the risk, but don't believe that we change all the time our involvement. Actually, it happens practically quite rarely that we do so, but if there are good reasons for, we can.
So, we are now at a point where we have thrown on you all the information that we had prepared on level of involvement, which was a big block, starting from the overall idea of the risk assessment, then the 3 steps on how to get to your involvement determination using the 4 criteria, until the final step that in the beginning sometimes was missed, to really determine based on the risk class which documents, which data, which activities are to be retained. What we have prepared now are some examples on how a certification program can look like, how you can break it down into meaningful groups of compliance demonstration activities and data, how you can classify or make the assessment and then classify the risk class and determine the data and activities to be retained. Before going into these examples, do you still have questions?
If you can go to the slide number 55. So what I recognize here, that you try to find a way for simplification of the assessment or the determination of the level of the involvement from the point of view of the product. For me, from my point of view as a small DOA, I would appreciate if I can see a slide from EASA with the title Simplified Risk Assessment for Small DOA. So because I think now we are, somehow we have to fulfill the requirements for the certification program as a small DOA in the same way as a big DOA like Airbus.
I think I see what you mean. On the next slide, I believe there is that perspective. The reason why we focused here, here you see we're focusing on the company, on small and medium sized enterprises. The reason why we have used the perspective of the product is that we are in the process of a product certification, where then the organization is one element. One of the 4 criteria is addressing the organization. But yes, it's implicitly there. But don't be too picky on the headline. But the idea of a proportionate approach for projects that involve simple projects, small companies, small and medium-sized companies, GA, lower end of GA. That's the idea of these proportionality ideas, yeah.
Maybe a small DOA doesn't mean that you do not work on a large project or a large aircraft, so aeroplane. So therefore, the risk-based approach is finally the same. It depends on the novelty, complexity, criticality, and your performance, how high the risk is. So it's a bit difficult to simplify it for a small company, where in principle the job is the same. But if you want to make it really easy and you have small projects, you could just add a line. If you have your table with the requirement, means of compliance, and compliance document, you could just add some columns for novelty, complexity, criticality, and performance. And then you make for each document row just yes, no, retained, not retained. And then you have very quickly this done if the project isn't too huge. So then you don't group it really. So then each document is a CDI. And it's very simple, but you have to do this exercise for each document. So if you think about it and you become aware of it, it's not so complex as it may sound like at the first instance.
If I can also elaborate on that. Maybe yes, this is a dimension that we have not considered at the moment. On the other hand, this is something that we can think about it from my point of view in the future. It would not work according to this definition, because this type of simplification, which is not meaning that we have less concern from a safety point of view, it's just saying to reach that level of information we need less steps, so we don't need the attachments in this case. And this would not work for small DOAs. But in the case of small DOAs, where, for example, you have one person covering more panels, you may consider other simplification, and this is something that we can look at in the coming months and years after some implementation of it. So I think it's a good point. we don't have it now, but first of all, you can propose a simplification yourself. But that kind of simplification would not work for small DOAs in the meaning of size of the company, because exaggerating a small DOA still can be an applicant for a new Part 25 airplane, TC. So there is no exclusion. While in that case, the detail of the attachment might be relevant. That's why you have to look into them. Thing that you don't need to if you have a simple product. So this kind of simplification is linked to the simplicity of the products.
That reminds me of one more as administrative issue. You also see us taking notes when you ask questions. We've learned that through the previous events that we've done on similar roadshow events, they are very good questions that lead us to maybe reconsider and further think about the AMCs and guidance material, or drafting some frequently asked questions to further support you in applying this new rule amendment. So as Stefano mentioned, we are taking note of these ones. We'll discuss them internally, and they may end up maybe eventually in the AMC guidance material or on the website as frequently asked questions. So we'll take note of all of these. Yeah.
It's regarding the disagreement with the LOIs. Do we have to redo the complete risk assessment and the CDI, so they just agree with the LOI?
No, the idea there is we work based on your proposal. If we disagree, for example, with your classification as novel, we would, you say it's not novel, we think it's novel, we would reclassify and then redo the risk assessment and look at whether the risk class changes and whether the retained document needs to be changed.
But actually the certification program needs to be updated accordingly.
Correct. Yes.
So.
So, another question.
Damen und Herren, Frau Bremitzer, will the disagreement on the first proposal have a feedback on the DOA performance?
What do you mean?
Well, if we say it's a risk class 2 and the EASA comes to conclusion it's risk class 4, and is it then a bad point on the DOA performance?
I would say, if I can to answer for you, I would say for such a simple disagreement, no. But if you really
you give me,
bad,
yeah. Well, we do score you on the quality of the certification program, of which the LOI determination is one element. Now, I don't suspect that you have to do it really badly to have a consequence on the performance. But it could be if you send in a certification program without any LOI element in it, or if the risk analysis is completely off in the sense of you've determined something as not critical, which clearly is critical, and things like that. So it can have an influence, but not as one element that suddenly triggers high to medium or to low. I wouldn't think that.
Should we go to the...
Okay, then let's look into some examples.
So, these examples come from real case that we have received during the advanced application. So we got the authorization from the company to describe them. If I may suggest, but you can disagree, don't focus on the type of decision that we made. It's not the aim to share with you pre-cooked decision of the agency. It's really to show you how this LOI can be proposed. So the first case is a major non-significant change consisting of installation of a foldable galley with a water heater in the rear cargo area. And it will allow to have another alternative configuration of the aircraft where the equipment will be unfolded to provide in-flight service of hot beverage. Interesting. So in this case, the company made a proposal of 7 CDIs. You can read them with me. So structure and weight is the first one. The second is steel structure, loads path, electrical provision, electrical analysis, cabin general, cabin cargo area, water circuit. Already at this level, I honestly don't remember the rest of the slides, but if I look at them in this case, what I see is, for example, you have the first two CDI for one panel. I may suspect that the reason why this was split in two CDIs is because maybe in one of the two they can identify specific item. For example, the first one is novel while the second one is not novel. So that's a dimension that you should try to use because it may ease your assessment and lead us to a decision which is focusing on what we really have to be involved. What you see here is, can you read from the back? Yeah, okay. So it's an example of how one CDI can be described. That's a very important piece of information. Don't forget the new requirements on the certification program. You have to provide a description of the project, of the design, but the CDI to be completely assessed should be described, of course. So here is where you provide a description of the CDI. This is one example, of course. You don't have to do it exactly in this way, but you can take inspiration from this, and I think we will share the presentation so you can take the time for reading it thoroughly. What you have in the first part is the description of the CDI with the affected panel, the requirements which are affected, the means of compliance, and the technical notes, which are the compliance documents. In the lower part of the slide, you see the assessment. So this is a proposal of the LOI of the risk assessment, which ends up with a final determination of the class. You see in this case, the risk class is 2, and this is the result of not novel CDI complex for a high performance CDI of the DOA in that domain, and criticality, yes. So this was identified as critical. You see there are some justification in this case why it's novel, complex, and why it's critical. I imagine here there was no justification for critical because it's the most conservative choice, so that's why it's not necessary. But whenever you want to propose something which is going on the non-conservative direction, so not novel, non-complex, not critical, there you have to provide some justification. There may be cases where this is really obvious. You can even dare not to write anything, but expect in such a case that we may come back to you with some questions. Why is this novel according to your assessment?
Ideally, it should be, the justification should be also on both sides. So even if it's critical, even if in this case it's complex, there should be a short explanation. If it's really obvious, probably not, but it goes in both directions. So also we want to understand why we should be involved rather than justifying that we are involved.
Because this will help us then to define the remaining part of the assessment. You see here in the lower part what is the proposed involvement of the agency, which is for panel 3, if you cannot read, is the review of the 3 technical notes in this case. So this is a summarized block of information. That's a proposal of the LOI complete from the beginning. Of course, what you don't see here is the rest of the certification program with the compliance checklist, for example. Another important aspect that you have to consider, you have to ensure that the combination of the CDI cover the full certification program. So it cannot happen that one requirement or one specific means of compliance of a requirement is not part of any of the CDI.
Maybe a small add-on on the justification. So the AMC GM allows to provide not an justification case that it's obvious. Please put yourself in our position. We receive many applications from many companies, and if it's obvious for you, it's not yet obvious for us maybe. So this possibility exists, but please put yourself in a role that you have no knowledge about the special design, and is it really obvious for you, for a third person, assuming it's an engineer, but if you have some doubts, put some justification there.
It can be maybe as short as in this case, but at least it gives us the direction, what is behind your decision.
Correct. Avoid long stories, but make it clear.
That's another CDI in the same project. So in this case, it's cabin cargo area. The way the information are described are the same. In this case, you see there are more justification. the final risk class is 3, and yeah. That's a summary of the LOI. So each of these CDI result in a decision or in a proposal regarding our involvement on a specific type of compliance data. This table summarizes for each document what is the final proposal. So you see for each document what is the risk class that was proposed and what is also the involvement. Involvement is in this column, written yes or no. There are other information, of course, but for the sake of the LOI, they are not relevant. And this is a way how you can summarize finally the level of involvement for a certain project. Most of you, I guess, or many of you are not new to make a proposal of the level of involvement. So from my experience, I see normally a table at the end with a proposal on the documents. So this is a way to reach the same point using the assessment of the new Part 21.
Maybe as well here something. This is one example. It doesn't say you have to do it in this way, and it's not perfect as well. If we see here this row, for example, there's a TBD, but only where it's proposed to be retained. So why don't we have to confirm that this is really risk class 1? So just want to say these are examples how you could do it, but maybe it's not perfect, and you can do it maybe even a better way. It's quite open.
Yeah.
Well, the question is, do we need this agreement date? Actually, this is one proposal. You don't need to have an agreement date. This was the idea of the applicant, and if you have an agreement date, and I ask myself, well, then everything should be agreed, and not only the ones they propose for involvement. But no, it's not necessary.
We have another example. Should I move to the next example? Do you have any other question on this one? So the second example is for an avionics change which installs new avionics suite based on digital instruments for primary flight information. In this case, the power plant instruments are displayed through analog displays. Dimension that we have not seen before. Here you have the compliance checklist that I would expect you are all providing to us as part of the certification program. And new information that before you didn't have to, but you have to provide, or you can do it in this way, is to include on one column that requirements, that specific document to which CDI is part of. And this is a way of ensuring that you are covering all the requirements. So again, this is one way, it's not the only way. But in this case, you are sure that you are addressing everything, and this is addressed by one or the other CDIs. You can see there are some requirements, for example, the 1351, which is part of, the 1331, which is part of 2 different CDIs. This can be possible because you may have 2 different documents which are assessed as part of 2 different CDIs. Again, this is one way, it's not the only way. It's just to show you how you could do it or how some other companies have done it. And we come to the next step, which is the risk assessment. I guess you recognize a similar type of information like in the previous example. So these are 2 different companies, but they ended up providing us with a proposal in a similar way.
If you go back, there are some specificities which are maybe interesting. If you see these examples in the paragraph 1321, here actually the applicant decided to include all the panels, so it's 6 and 1, and actually the report here is the same. So they have 2 times listed the same report because it's part of 2 different CDIs, which might happen.
Yeah.
It's a decision again from the applicant's perspective, but they decided to group their meaningful grouping to make it per panel in this case, which resulted in the case that they listed 2 times the same report, which are part of 2 different CDIs. which makes sense if the performance of panel 6 and panel 1 are really different. Just showing or making obvious this is one way of doing it, not necessary to do it, but it's an interesting way and a possible for sure.
So here you have the risk assessment. Again, the name, the number of the CDI, the affected panels, the requirements. What you see in the approach line, it's actually the description of the CDI. And then in the lower part, you see the assessment. So the first part is the likelihood. And here you see that novel, complex, DOA performance is, the classification is not novel, not complex, high. So this brings to a very low likelihood, which is then combined with the second matrix on the top of this slide, and the final risk class here it was 1. And this is reflected then in the lower matrix where you have the list of documents which are part of this CDI, and you see that under EASA review and EASA witnessing, this is a very important information here. You see they make a proposal not only on the review of document but also on the witnessing, because there might be some flight tests or some ground tests which we might want to be where we might want to be involved. So in this case, risk class 1, no involvement, as we have seen before. In the same project, another CDI, so I just have here the result of the assessment. In this case, the risk class was 2, and you can see that they have made a proposal regarding the involvement of the agency. So the first line, the AFM supplement, has been proposed for EASA review, and also the flight test program is for EASA review. And this is, I would like to go back to the example, to what I mentioned before. Within risk class 2, you can have different type of involvement. For different reasons, another DOA, they may propose the same CDI, but maybe in this case, in their case, they think it's more relevant to review the flight test report. So why should we say clearly, risk class 2, you have to review this, 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 and that? It's a dimension that where we can leave you flexibility to make a proposal, and where we can discuss together what is the best final involvement that that CDI specifically would require. Class 2, again, you see no witnessing. We said in the beginning, risk class 2, review of some document, but typically it does not require our involvement in tests. It's not a must. We can find some cases where still, yes, it's a risk class 2, but there is a good reason why we want to be involved in a specific flight test point for whatever reason. So you can play with the elements and decide what is the most suitable solution for that specific exercise. Do you have any question on this second example?
I think what we want to show to you is that there are really different ways of organizing your certification program, and take the one that suits you best, that requires as limited changes compared to the past.
Yep.
And the advanced application projects have shown to us that we can work with everything. You provide the data to us, how it works best for you, and then we can adapt. So these are 2 examples. You can use them, you can do it differently. It's just important that all the information is there.
To conclude on the examples we provide in our presentation, 2 links. These are from some workshop that we did during the advanced application, and are examples of a small company, small in the meaning of the type of product, so this is Tecnam, and the second examples are from EAD and Lufthansa Technik, so it gives you different flavor. You can look at them, you have the minutes where the examples are shown, so these are also additional guidance or what we discussed before as best practices. So these are examples that we accepted. To conclude on the type of approach, when we started the discussion with the industry, we provided 2 possible options. What we discussed, what we described as the top-down approach and the bottom-up approach. Top-down means you take the project, you split into CDIs, you make the assessment on the CDI, and then you propose on the individual compliance data what is the involvement. Bottom-up, it means you do it the other way around. So you do things as you normally have done so far. So you have your list of compliance document, test, compliance data, and then you make the assessment on each document of the CDI. In this case, you will have to do much more assessment, of course, because you have to do the same assessment for each document. And also the other additional complication is that you will end up with a risk class for a single document. So there you have to make a decision. And for one document, risk class 2, 3, 4 is difficult to say what is the difference. So from the examples that we received, because during the advanced application we received some bottom-up approach, they made, in some cases, conservative choices. Like, for example, risk class 2 up, it means EASA review the documents. Again, it depends on you, how much you want to spend also efforts on this. You may decide at the end of the day, you want to give not too much, dedicate too much effort to that. So you provide a less sophisticated proposal, but there is a tool that if you apply in an extensive way, it could really help you to make a really focused proposal of the LOI. So this is an example of what we have described as top-down approach. The two examples we have seen before are top-down approach, and this is another one. Again, you have, first of all, the requirements on the left of the first table, the compliance checklist, the affected EASA panel, for each requirement, the affected CDI, and then in the lower matrix, an assessment for each CDI, novel, complex, DOA performance, criticality, and risk class. This is the top-down approach. So once you have the risk class, then you can propose the type of involvement. And you see you have here also cases where for one requirements you have two panels, and the proposal is also to have a different involvement depending on the panel. This is also something that you can do. For one document, you propose involvement for one panel and not for another. Bottom-up approach, again, you do the assessment for each requirement, so for each document corresponding to a certain requirement, and then you end up with the risk class, and there you have to make a proposal for our involvement. So in this case, our feeling is that you have less power to make a more focused proposal.
Maybe if you go one slide back, I'm not sure that it's so quickly understandable for everybody if you see it the first time. So what you see here is that you have several requirements, several compliance documents are part of the same CDI. And on the bottom you see for one CDI, let's take CDI D, where you have several EASA panels involved. This is one possibility to do it. And actually the performance per EASA panel is different. So we have here panel 3, panel 5, panel 11. It's high, medium, low. Criticality is non-critical. And then you came up with three different risk classes depending on the involved panel for this CDI. And this is then going back into the risk class for the same CDI. We have here 3 times for 3 different documents we have in one CDI, and different risk classes actually depending on the panel, and therefore the involvement might be different per panel. Again, this is one way how you could do it, and you can group it as you like, and you have seen now several examples how it could be done. No must, but take the examples, have a look, and check what's the best from your perspective for your kind of project.
Do you have any questions on these examples?
Thomas Zunkeller, SII. Can we group the CDIs differently for each project, meaning panel or ATA chapter?
Yes.
Yes, so clearly yes. You can group it for each project as you like. You're totally free in that. Maybe it has an advantage if you go into the same direction for the next project, if you have the same team in EASA, and then you could just argue, well, that's exactly the same as provided last time, which makes it easier maybe, but it's not necessary. You can really decide for each project on your own what makes most sense for you.
Hello, Marco Festa from AirPlus. I would just like to ask if EASA is planning to have a sort of database of standardized CDI, at least with novelty and complexity definition already given, because that's a standard practice. We can find standard database for the risk of the flight testing, or standard database for the normal functions in a lot of also standards.
So first of all, that's a good idea. We spent already a lot of time on this, so we have already some, I wouldn't call them examples, but criteria. If you go in the AMC and also in the attachments, already there you will find much more than what we have said here. But going further and taking real examples where in a specific project, something like this one, that's something that we can consider for sure.
At least to assure standardization, because
sure.
The point is, the example of the AMC, they are general. If we are able to create a database, then according also to what our colleagues said before, if we are dealing also with the NAA, we can have a standard and common reference to say the novelty and complexity are already defined.
Yeah. Novelty would depend on the DOA normally. Complexity would make more sense, but maybe also novelty we could give some examples.
I think this is what we tried in principle with the attachment to the certification memorandum, where you can find per panel what usually is retained by us and not for the final result. Otherwise, I think it's a bit difficult, because what's novel for the one applicant is maybe not novel for the next one. Performance is different as well. So to make a CDI such generic that it's applicable for everyone for the same similar case, it's quite difficult. And actually, it's really rare that you have from one applicant an identical CDI than for another applicant, since usually the projects are a little bit different. And how to group them, maybe one company decides completely different the way it groups than another one. So, and by providing such a list, we would go into the direction to tell you how a CDA should exactly look like, which you are completely free and flexible. So to have this really standardized list, I'm not sure that this is a good idea.
We will certainly, after a certain while, review our experience with your organizations, and if we see that things are coming back, then we will add them either to the AMC or to the certification memorandum in whatever form it will exist then, and give these examples. If it's really useful for more than one organization, then we will update this material.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Good point. Actually, our certification memorandum is much more flexible than the AMC GM material. So, because to change the AMC material takes quite a time, to update the CM goes much quicker, and somewhere in future, the cert memo will probably disappear, and we will provide the same information nevertheless on our EASA webpage. And then it's even easier to update it if we get good information from you, from industry, how things are dealt with, which is really kind of standardized way, best practice, then we can share this immediately, or very quickly at least. And that's the idea we are going to go.
Any further questions?
Red, then it works.
No? Good. When investigating on novelty and complexity,
there are quite some examples in the AMC already. Would it be accepted for EASA or acceptable for EASA if I reduce my investigation only to those examples, or do I have to consider different points as well?
You have to consider everything which is part of your project. So for sure the examples are not exhaustive. We tried to put in as much as possible from our current point of view, but no, you have to consider your project, your compliance demonstration, your technology, and for sure not everything will be covered by the by the AMCGM material.
Thank you.
It would.
And the point and the difficulty for us is we don't know what's coming tomorrow. So we have tomorrow electrical aviation, maybe hydrogen aviation, or something we don't think about even today. So we cannot consider everything in our regulation. This simply doesn't work.
And it could even restrict you in a way that if it's not in, we don't want it that way, that if it's not in the AMC you can't use it. So we need to maintain that flexibility to allow you to make the assessments. We give you examples to guide the ideas, but then it's up to you to determine whether it's complex or not. Anything else? How many of you have already, through the advanced application phase or not visible to us, hidden in certification projects, tried to apply the level of involvement concept? So few only. Come on. Anybody of you want to share your experience? Only if it's positive, of course. No, no, but positive and negatives. Also guidance to us, what could maybe be done easier. You can also think about it, and can ask the same question again after lunch so that you have time to prepare. But we would be interested from two perspectives: sharing with your colleague what works well. If you have experience like the examples that we have shown from two companies, that you can share with your colleagues how it can be done easily, or where you have faced difficulties, how you overcame them, or some recommendations to us, what we can try to ease, to simplify. Who's brave enough? Another question. Okay, I will put that question aside. I come back after lunch. Be prepared.
Sorry, it's just a question on another topic. In some of the other regulations, approved organizations have to demonstrate their performance, and they're driving towards the PSOE approach, the performance-based approach. So if a design organization is measuring its own performance and it can demonstrate a certain level, should it only rely on your dashboard, or could they use that evidence to substantiate performance?
The dashboard is the starting point, and when you have other ideas, think it's not up to date, it's not recent, we may not have seen everything, then of course you can provide that information in your proposal, and then we make the assessment and then come up with the final determination of the performance for this project.
Actually, the performance that we take into account is really the panel specific, the technical competence specific feedback and performance. So we have as well the overall DOA performance, which is less interesting for this point. So we really want to know if we have a structural change, what is the performance in structures of this applicant. So even if the overall DOA performance might be very good or very bad, the structural performance in this example might be much better or much worse. So therefore, this is the important part. If you have now a structural change, how likely is it that you have a non-compliance in this structural area? And therefore we want to take into account really the performance in this structural area, and that's why we take the panel specific performance and not something which is maybe covering more than this.
And level of involvement, in the end, if you think it to the end, is one element of a performance-based approach, because we determine our involvement based on 4 criteria, one of which is the performance. The better your performance is, the less there's a likelihood of an unidentified non-compliance, the lower our involvement needs to be from a risk-based perspective. It's also, as who gave the introduction, I think Ralph mentioned in his bit, it's one small element of safety management system. It's the first step in Part 21 that we are doing to improve the safety management principles idea in Part 21.
Just a question on a completely different topic, slightly. You mentioned earlier about minor changes and minor repairs, which obviously the agency has no LOI, assuming the design organisation has privilege. Under audit, do you expect to see any change in the way in which that's assessed for risk assessment?
You mean where there's no privilege, right? If the agency is approving the minor change. Where the privilege exists, there's no change, because there the agency is not involved. You do it fully under your privilege. The normal oversight kicks in, but the same as it's today. But you don't apply intrinsically a level of involvement when doing your assessment. You are fully responsible to demonstrate and verify compliance.
So it doesn't make sense. If you don't apply for EASA, why should you propose something for our involvement, which we don't see? So therefore the risk assessment is not needed, no proposal for involvement. We are not involved anyway, you do it under your privilege.
More questions?
Hello, Adrian Harrison again from Airbus Helicopters. Michael, it's in response to your question about the guinea pig, shall we say, that went through the process for the last 18 months. Yes, it was difficult initially. In part, first of all, we decided that we had to get something more out of the system that we currently had between EASA and Airbus. So the first thing we did was all our CDIs were based on panels, your panels. So that helped the process integrate into EASA better. That meant we had to change a little bit inside of our DOAs, which was fine. The second biggest thing was then the groupings, but particularly the team across the avionics, the mechanical and the certification team, to get their heads around how do you group aspects of compliance together to get a CDI. That works quite well now in that we don't just do it for STCs, we do it for minors inside our organisation as well, purely to get people into the habit of thinking. 2 years in, I would say it works quite well. We've had no different panel recommendations back from EASA in those applications, and we've had about 16 or 18 STCs over that time frame, and we've had nothing back from EASA saying we got it wrong, which is good in that sense. In terms of the speed of the process, I think we're getting back to where we were originally in terms of the applicants. So yeah, it's looking good reasonably so far.
Have you any experience, thanks for that feedback, have you any experience whether it was helpful for your project throughout the project? So definitely a bit more work in the beginning, you're getting used to it, back to normal speed, but any benefits that you saw towards the end of the process, that it was clear when EASA will be involved, no surprises towards the end?
For me, and I alluded to it before, we're trying desperately to get the risk on the table at the very beginning of the project. And I was interested in your response about 4-week turn time. That I would like to see, with all due respect. I know there's a lot going on inside of EASA, but there's a lot going on inside of our companies as well. And there's a lot of pressure, commercial, finance, as well as risk. So I'd like to see that really homed in on, but we play a part in that as well.
So what I take from that, it can work, it will work, but what is important for you, what is key for you is that you have the feedback on the involvement on time.
Because then we know what the target is. We think we have an idea of what we do in terms of flight test, ground test, etc., but we need your okay with that if it's an STC.
You need to do it anyhow, you just need to know whether we want to participate.
Correct. But it's working well in that sense. But we are 18 months in.
Okay, thanks for the feedback. Okay, so what we have prepared for the rest of this session, still talking about level of involvement. We already mentioned a couple of times the term advanced application. So what we actually did and what Leonardo will present to you is that throughout the past 2 years, when we had from the moment on where we had the first mature draft of this LOI concept, the first mature draft of the guidance material, we started to test it with a couple of companies. So to give us the opportunity to learn on live project, on real projects, how the rule, the draft rule at that point in time worked, how the draft guidance material is user-friendly, can be applied, is sufficient, and also to give you, as an organization, the possibility to test it internally, to start preparing yourself for what is coming now next year, the applicability of LOI, to start thinking about amending your procedures, start about training your staff. And we were really glad to see that so many companies of yours participated in this LOI advanced application phase. That really helped us a lot to develop that guidance material that you now have, which is probably not perfect, but it's probably quite mature. And a big thank you for all of these organizations who have participated. Leonardo will give you a bit more detail how we set it up, which organizations participated, and what especially we learned out of this project.
Okay. Let's continue then with this overview about the advanced application phase. We started in October 2016 in agreement with ASD, Aerospace and Defense Industry of Europe. This was an initiative taken by the agency with the ASD in order to facilitate the introduction of the new requirement and to test it in a kind of flexible environment. The reason for this initiative is clear. We all of us recognize that there is an impact on a day-by-day activity during the certification process due to the new LOI concept. So we decided to test it before it becomes mandatory. So this advanced application phase started in October 2016 and was completed in December 2018. So it's more than 2 years. We advertised this initiative as much as we could. We presented this initiative during the DOA certification workshop, during the STC workshop, and ASD made also a kind of internal presentation of this initiative. As a result of that, we had a participation of about 25 organizations, and they are listed in this slide. As you can see, they represent more or less all the industry. There are big companies working on large aeroplanes. There are companies on rotorcraft, there are STC holders, there are general aviation companies, and there are also engine manufacturers. So we believe that this initiative was, the participation to this initiative was quite representative. During these 2 years and some months, we collected more than 250 pilot projects. At the end, we were unable to count them because there were so many. And we tried to discuss all these projects, and every time we found something which was relevant for the guidance material, we tried to improve the guidance material, taking into account what we discovered applying it. In October 2016, there was only the initial draft of the certification memorandum available. We had that one plus the opinion on the Part 21. So the opinion gives the backbone, so it shows which are the 4 criteria to be considered for the risk assessment and which are the duties of the applicant and of the agency. But the details on how to implement this new LOI concept were contained in this certification memorandum, which we have already discussed in this morning. You already seen it. It's now transferred into an AMC, the AMC 21B100 A and 21A15 6. So this is the participation to the advanced application phase, and then we have also performed some statistics. So I will give you some numbers. This statistic is based on the first 80 pilot projects. We only consider these first 80 pilot projects because at a certain point in time it was too difficult to count all the 250. But this statistic is representative of what we experienced. As you can see in this slide, we have the average number of CDI per project. Just a reminder for all of you, the risk assessment is to be performed at CDI level, and the LOI proposal at the end of the day, it's at CDI level. So this number, the average of 6 CDI per project, tells you that as an average, for each project we had 6 CDI, and the risk assessment was performed 6 times. Okay, but as you can see, there were some organizations that decided to use what we called the bottom-up approach, meaning that they decided to make a risk assessment at compliance level, at document level. Other organizations used what we called the top-down approach, where they really made a grouping. So you can see how it could be different if you group or not group. Nevertheless, we accepted all the CDI proposed. So 100% of the CDI proposed were accepted. In no cases we rejected a breakdown of the certification program because we disagreed with the way the applicant decided to break down into meaningful groups. These projects were mainly major changes, STC. In one case we had a derivative product, but all the others were major changes or STC. Now some statistics about the classification of the criteria of the novelty, complexity, criticality. So for this 80 pilot project, we, as an average, we had 7% of the CDIs which were classified as novel, and 93% of the CDIs which were classified as not novel. Then we had about 20% of the CDIs which were classified complex, and 80% of the CDI not complex. And regarding the criticality, we had 32% of the CDIs which were classified as critical, and 68 non-critical. Okay, these numbers can give you just a feeling. Of course, if you have a project tomorrow, you can have different. You can end up with different statistics, but it's quite representative of what we have done. And as a result, we had 59% of the CDIs which were classified as risk class 1. For these CDIs, there were no more involvement of the agency after the acceptance of the certification program, while 26% of the CDIs were in risk class 2, 11% of the CDIs in risk class 3, and 4% in risk class 4. Then we tried to compare this value and the actual involvement of the agency during this pilot project with the involvement that we would have had in case we had used the previous approach. And the result is that the level of involvement of the agency is more or less the same than what we had before. We observed a slight decrease in the level of involvement of the agency. So generally, this new concept provides a similar level of involvement than the previous way to determine the LOI. In some cases, you can see a decrease. What is more important than that is that we testing this new LOI concept during the mass application phase, we realized and we had the proof that the concept is effective. So it can really work. And of course, we improved the material which was available in 2016 significantly in order to consider all the input and all the experience that we collected during these 2 years. But what we have now, we are confident that what we have now published is workable, is effective, and it proved to be effective during this advanced application phase. Additionally, what we did during these 2 years, through the advanced application phase, we were forced to train our experts because they were faced to this advanced application phase. So we performed more than 20 sessions of internal training, including NIAs, in order to ensure that all our PCM and experts were aware about the new concept. And this was a good way also to familiarize with the new LOI concept. And on the other side, this was also a good experience for the industry because they had the possibility to test this new concept in a flexible environment. They tested their internal procedures and they improved them before the new LOI concept became mandatory. Then in this slide we have still for the statistical standpoint an overview about how many times we required some adjustment on the classification of the risk proposed by the applicant. So now still considering the CDIs proposed by the applicant, in 92% of the cases we accepted their classification for the novelty, and in 8% of the cases we asked to the applicant to change the classification proposed for the novelty. Regarding the complexity, we observed that in 96% of the cases the CDI, the classification of the complexity was accepted by us. Only in 4% of the cases we asked to the applicant to change the classification of the complexity. Then the criticality. 93% of the times we accepted the classification for the criticality proposed by the applicant, and in 7% of the cases we asked to the applicant to change it. The list of documents retained, then at the end of the risk assessment you have to make a proposal for the data and activities retained by the agency. What we observed during this advanced application phase is that 61% of the cases we accepted the list of document and activity proposed by the applicant, and 39% of the cases we asked to change something, add something, or remove something. So in overall, if we consider the CDIs, 55% of the CDIs were accepted as they were proposed, including the list of documents and activities retained by the agency, and in 45% of the cases we asked for some changes. We believe that this is a good result because it means that the guidance was clear enough to be applied in a systematic way, and we believe also that this was a good experience for everybody. We have now understood where are the typical errors and which are the best practices, and actually these best practices and the typical issues are part of the next part of the presentations. So this gave us the experience to be now quite confident for the implementation phase. We believe and we hope that it will be a smooth implementation phase.
And I think we have to consider for these numbers, these were the first 80 projects. So based on this information, we slightly adapted even the cert memo. And this is really the starting phase. So at the beginning, we had all to learn, the companies as well as us. So, and I think for this condition, the outcome is actually really good. And we would expect that it's even less corrections in future.
Okay. Then the last part of the presentation, which is best practices and overall EASA consideration, which is actually one of the results of the advanced application phase.
Actually, I have one comment to the wording you made. when you said on the 59% there was no further involvement. Actually, this is one of a very common mistake. So after formalization, there was no involvement. So no further involvement sounds like that there was some involvement before, and this is actually the difficulty and the confusing part of this wording, involvement. What exactly does it mean? If we talk about involvement, it's really involvement in the verification of compliance demonstration. And here it was after formalization we decided we are not involved. So we're not involved in the sense of LOI before, we just familiarized ourselves, but in the verification of compliance demonstration, we were not involved at all in 59% of the CDIs. Maybe I'm a bit picky on this, but since we have this discussion quite a lot, I wanted to concentrate on this at least once more. So now we come to the best practices and overall EASA considerations. It's a summary of what we have heard before, but I think a good summary of what are best practices, what are the usual or most often mistakes that were made in the past. And let's go through this step by step. So the grouping of elements into CDIs, compliance demonstration items, facilitates the risk assessment. Okay, that's why we have built up this new tool. It should be case-by-case consideration before deciding which certification program breakdown process to follow. So what does it mean? So what Leo explained, and then we as well, this bottom-up approach, top-down approach. What makes the best sense for my current project to group it into CDIs? It's really up to you. Check what is the best, most efficient way to work from your perspective. We had no case where we told the applicant the CDI wouldn't be applicable and acceptable. So think about it and do what's best for your company, and most probably this is acceptable for us as well. So depending on the size and the complexity of the project, different approaches may be beneficial. And we had this question before, it's not necessary to do it in the same way as in the project before. It has some benefits, but it's not necessary. If you think it's for the second project, completely different approach is practical and best for you, do it. Having the CDI reference in the table in the certification program, so in the table where we have listed all the certification requirements, the means of compliance, the compliance data and activities actually, if you put in the same table the CDI reference is the recommended way from our side. By this you ensure that really everything is covered by at least one CDI, which is a must. Otherwise, if you just provide a statement in the end, you're going to fail, probably. So we had some companies who said, no, I don't want to fill it in for IT reasons, for whatever. And they just made the statement, and we had cases for sure where the statement was made, but actually something was missing and not covered by any CDI, so no risk assessment and no proposal of any involvement or non-involvement. So therefore the strong recommendation is put it in your table, and by this it cannot be forgotten, and by the process itself is ensured that nothing is forgotten. So by this each and any compliance demonstration aspect is covered by at least one CDI. More explanations about risk assessment would help EASA to carry out a timely assessment of the LOI proposal. So what's meant by this? The 4 criteria: novelty, complexity, criticality. 3 criteria, the DOA performance I take out of that. Please provide a reasonable justification why something is novel or not novel, and so on. If it's really completely obvious, clear from our side as well, and you see this already, it's not necessary. But if you have any doubt of it, provide a short justification. Again, don't make a huge page of explanation to it. We still have to read it, but provide some justification why something is complex, not complex, and so on. If a CDI affects more than one panel, consider whether the risk of an unidentified non-compliance would be different per panel. So if it's different per panel, a split would be recommended of the CDI. Maybe it's still one CDI, but you make a risk class per panel in this case. or you make even different CDIs out of it. That's your choice. But identify the panel's risk class if they are not the same. Otherwise, we have to do this job. We probably ask further questions. Oh, sorry, further questions back to you, which just stretch the process. Takes a little bit, takes more time from both sides, which we would like to avoid. Do not overcomplicate the concept. So creation of additional intermediate steps may not be needed. So we had some cases where interesting additional ideas were developed. Not saying that it was wrong, but it was really it was more complicated than necessary and took quite a bit of time to understand it and so on. This is not needed, and we would recommend not to overcomplicate it. I think if you go to the criteria as written in part 21, this should be sufficient. Issues encountered. So what went wrong? I explained it before. We had mix-up of complexity with novelties. Demonstration of compliance remains complex even if you have done it many times. So this was actually one of the most often seen mistake, that companies stated it's not complex because they were so well aware about the issue and the compliance demonstration activity, which is correct. However, the compliance demonstration itself was nevertheless complex because you had a human machine interface aspect. You had to have several flight crews to check this new function, and by this it is subjective, it is considered as complex. Independently, if you do it 100 times and always the same people perform this, okay, then it's not novel, maybe you have a good performance, but it stays complex. The LOI proposal does not contain a list of data activities to be retained. This is another issue we have encountered a few times. The risk class proposal is not the final step. So if you have made the risk assessment per CDI and it's okay, it's risk class 1, 2, 3, 4, still you have to propose what should be retained by EASA, which test should be witnessed, at which inspection EASA should participate. This is the information you have to propose. So it doesn't stop at the risk class, it's really what is the retained item by EASA. This should be proposed and should be the final step. If the initial LOI proposal is modified, then following EASA assessment review, the certification program has to be amended accordingly. So if for whatever reason, because your certification approach has changed, your design has changed, or maybe there's some input from EASA experts, whatever the reason is, and this comes to a different level of involvement, all this has to be documented in the certification program. So if there's any update, please update the cert program accordingly. If the CDIs are not listed in the table of requirements and corresponding means of compliance, this is what I explained on the slide before, some elements of the certification program might not be included in any CDI. This would mean no risk assessment. By this, we would not accept it, and even the application wouldn't be complete. Please consider this, the recommendation I made before. And merging of risk classes is not in line with the intent of the risk-based approach in part 21. So in the advanced application phase, we had at least one case where someone had the brilliant idea to put risk class 1 and 2 together, no involvement, risk class 3 and 4 together, some involvement, and that's it. Okay, at least it's simple, but it's not really risk-based anymore. So therefore this is not in line with the risk-based approach, not in line with part 21, and so the keeping of 4 risk classes should be the way forward. Any questions on that? Okay. Other clarifications. So the risk-based approach is introduced on the basis of ICAO Annex 19, Safety Management System, and to ensure a safety oversight function in accordance with the established procedures in a standardized manner. An increase or decrease of our involvement was and is not the intent of the risk-based approach. So we had some applicants who believed, yeah, LOI is there to reduce heavily the involvement of EASA. No, it's not. It's really only a risk-based approach. If this leads to less involvement, perfect. Maybe it leads to a higher involvement in special cases, but that's the idea. It's a risk-based approach, and how much we are involved, if this increase, doesn't matter, as long as it is risk-based. The risk classes are risk indicators only. The higher the risk, the higher the involvement. It's not and cannot be the intent of a risk class to have a predefined involvement for each possible kind of change or type certificate. So actually this was the starting point even from our side, that we say, okay, a risk class for a certain aspect leads to a certain involvement. But this is going to fail, we have seen. So you cannot identify by 4 risk classes the whole subject of aviation, from a little minor change to a balloon up to a new supersonic aircraft, or whatever the change for STC could be. This would fail in any way, especially if we think about new technologies. So it's just a risk indicator, and don't overestimate this term of compliance demonstration item. The only reason is to make a risk assessment to indicate, do we have a lower or higher risk? That's it. The 4 criteria lead to 24 possible combinations. And for the simplification, these 24 combinations result in 4 risk classes that are of a continuous nature and not discrete steps. We have thought about it to make fewer than 4 risk classes, but actually then a change of these 4 criteria would not any longer result in a risk class change, or in many cases it would not. And therefore it would become too meaningless. And therefore finally we said, okay, 4 risk classes is the right level of simplification, but still to make it meaningful. And this is where we are. And this is what I said already, CDI is only a tool to perform the risk assessment on a meaningful level, instead of performing it for each compliance document and activity. So the reason is to simplify, to make a few risk assessments instead of hundreds. And I think these 3 slides summarizes well the background, what to consider. And I think if you take these 3 slides together with the AMCGM material, you should be in the position to write an appropriate procedure as part of your design organization approval. Questions? The lunch is still in your stomach, right?
How many of the novelty CDIs were found by EASA?
Well, that's a good question. We have seen that it was only 7%, I think, of the novelty considerations were changed by EASA. If we change it in the novel direction or in the non-novel direction is actually not, I don't know. I assume that, well, in the rare cases when I was the PCM, I think we considered it is novel instead of not novel. But I had even other cases, a few cabin safety items where it was a new cabin interior layout, and they said, yeah, it's a new a new cabin interior. But okay, if you have an STC or a major change, it's always new. Otherwise, you don't apply for it. And this is not what should be considered as new. It's just if you have a complete new technology, or if you have a canted seat, which you have never done before, then it would be new for you. But if you just replace the economy seat A by economy seat B, this is business as usual. That shouldn't be considered as new. So it went actually in both directions, but how many in which one, I don't know.
Taking your statistics, it would be interesting for me how long it takes that the companies can adapt to the process properly. So if you look in the future, we have about 6 months ahead. We have to change the design organization management handbook, and we have to implement the changes itself, and we have the first project which will be more or less the master. Then the time frame is very tight. So to get an idea, how long does it take to adapt that process to the companies with this 25, 26 partners you have had?
Well, I'm looking around if somebody has maybe a better answer than I. I didn't work with all of the companies. From my experience, there were a few companies who were very, very quick, and even the first proposal was already nearly there where we wanted to be. We had another applicant who tried to change everything all the time for a long period of time, and that I think we are even not today maybe at the target. So, but I think 6 months, I agree, it's challenging, but it can work. Maybe Rob, you have a different opinion or something to add?
No, I don't have a different opinion, but now is the time to start. I mean, really, to meet the deadline, I really urge you to start now. And I will repeat this in my presentation and maybe tomorrow as well. Get in touch with your DOA team leader. Make sure you're clear on the plan and the way forward, so you don't have any surprises come March next year.
I think it's quite normal to have some friction at the beginning. If you start to provide everything into a procedure and then to apply it for you, it's usual. You do it the first time, so you have to learn how to do it, what is really the best way for my kind of changes to do it. There is a learning curve, no question. And the first idea you have is probably not the 100% solution. So I think to exercise this for a few advanced application projects is for sure a good idea to sample this and check, okay, what works best for us. So, but I think 6 months works, but as Rob said, we should start as well. And I think our DOA team leaders will support where they can.
When there is a disagreement on a CDI, for example, how are we going to handle it? In one of the slides, you mentioned EASA may do the safety risk assessment. Does it mean the authority, the agency is doing the assessment, or are you going to tell us what is the problem with the novelty or the criticality and then ask to the design organization to do the assessment and amend all the other related documents? How does it work?
Well, it does work in this way that the applicant has to propose the risk assessment, has to propose everything, to justify everything, and we determine. So if we don't agree with this proposal, let's say the applicant says it's not novel, and we have seen by the description, oh well, there's for sure a novelty aspect inside, then we will justify why we consider it as novel, and this result then maybe in a higher risk class. If this will really result in a different involvement is maybe still questionable, but maybe yes. And then we will inform you about this. So we consider this as novel because whatever DO 170AC was used instead of B for the software development. Therefore, we consider this as novel. Therefore, we are at a higher risk class, and therefore we want to review the PSAC, PHAC, and we want to participate to an audit which was not considered for the lower risk class. So this could be then our answer. And our expectation is then that you adapt your certification program accordingly. Say, okay, EASA said it's novel, okay, so we do, and this is now the retained documents by EASA as we indicated to you via CPIAC, email, whatever.
Okay, thank you. If we submit an application for an STC before the entry into force date, do we have to consider the new approach if the expected approval date of the STC will fall beyond the entry into force date or before?
Yeah, so I think the point of time when you should consider is when you have agreed with your DOA team leader on the procedure how to implement it. And if this procedure is accepted by EASA, so this is a significant change to your terms of approval, by this point you should implement then the risk assessment. And
okay, then if we don't get this significant change approved for the DOA, then we will not be able to introduce those changes anyway, right?
Not yet in this program, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, thank you.
So by that you need to apply for a significant change?
Definitely, Yes.
Which will be provided in Rob's presentation as well.
Of course. We'll get to that.
Okay.